6-year-old boy stood in the dirt and listened as his village burned. No one came to stop it. No one ever did. This is the story of Tenebrae, the child who would one day be known as the Lord of Hunger. He was born on Medrias, a world that would later be called Nathema, though at the time it had no name that mattered. It was a forgotten planet, scarred by endless war between Sith clans who no longer remembered why they fought. Violence was not an event there. It was weather. It came without warning and passed without apology. Tenebrae's earliest memories were not of comfort or warmth or safety. They were of hunger, of shouting, of watching adults kill each other over scraps of land that could not feed them. On Medrias, strength decided truth. Weakness decided death. His father was a Sith Lord, but not a great one, not powerful, not respected. He ruled their small village through fear and punishment, using cruelty to hide his own insignificance. To the boy, his father was not a teacher or protector. He was a presence that filled rooms with silence, a shadow that made breathing feel dangerous. Tenebrae's mother tried to shield him, quietly, carefully, but compassion was a crime on Medrias. Mercy marked you as prey. She taught him to stay still when violence erupted, to watch, to remember. But she could not teach him how to feel, because feeling only led to pain. Other children cried. Tenebrae did not. He learned early that tears changed nothing. When the village elders spoke of the Sith, they spoke with reverence mixed with fear. They told stories of ancient lords, of power drawn from suffering, of strength born from dominance. And Tenebrae listened, not with awe, but with calculation. Even as a child, he understood something they did not. The Sith were not gods. They were survivors who learned faster than others. His father sensed the boy's detachment and mistook it for obedience. He tested him, punished him, pushed him into pain to see if fear would surface. But Tenebrae did not beg. He did not resist. He simply endured, and that frightened his father more than defiance ever could. In the Force, Tenebrae was already present, quiet, vast, and cold. The dark side did not whisper to him. It waited. It recognized something familiar, a hunger without emotion, a will without compassion. The day his father was overthrown by a rival Sith, Tenebrae watched without reaction. His mother screamed. The villagers knelt. The new master laughed. And the boy stood still, and eyes empty, as blood soaked into the ground at his feet. That night, his mother tried to run. She believed escape was still possible, that somewhere beyond Medrias, life could be different. She took his hand and pulled him through the darkness, away from fires and screaming. But they were found before dawn. The rival Sith dragged her back into the village and demanded Tenebrae watch. This was meant to break him. It did not. As his mother begged, as pain tore her voice apart, something inside Tenebrae clarified. Not rage, not grief, understanding. He saw that love was weakness because it gave others leverage. He saw that attachment was a chain others could pull. And he decided, silently, that no one would ever hold power over him again. When it ended, the Sith looked at the boy and waited for tears. There were none. In that moment, surrounded by death and smoke, Tenebrae did not feel loss. He felt separation, a clean cut, the final removal of something unnecessary. Medrias did not care that a child had lost everything, but the Force noticed that a child had learned something irreversible, and the galaxy, though it did not know it yet, had just taken its first quiet breath before a long, endless hunger. Tenebrae grew older, but nothing filled the space inside him. On Medrias, time did not soften children. It sharpened them. Hunger remained constant. Violence never paused. The village rebuilt itself only enough to be destroyed again. Bodies were buried quickly, names forgotten faster. And through it all, the boy moved like a shadow that did not react to light or darkness. Other children learned fear. Tenebrae learned observation. And he watched how people spoke differently when armed, how voices lowered around power, how strength changed truth. Lies survived if spoken by the strong. Truth died if whispered by the weak. These lessons settled deep inside him, quiet and permanent. He did not dream. Sleep came without images. When he woke, there was no sense of loss, no lingering warmth, just awareness, his own breathing, the distance between himself and everyone else. The villagers avoided him as he grew, not because he was violent, because he was empty. Children sense these things before adults do. They felt that he did not belong to them, that whatever looked out through his eyes was already elsewhere. In moments of pain, he did not scream. In moments of hunger, he did not beg. His body suffered, but his mind remained untouched. Pain became information, so fear became irrelevant. He noticed that those who cried received attention, but also punishment. Those who stayed silent were forgotten. Forgotten meant alive. The force moved around him like a slow tide. He did not reach for it. He did not name it. But when anger filled a room, he felt clarity. When someone nearby felt terror, his thoughts sharpened. He did not feed on emotion. He understood it. Sith overseers eventually returned to the village, drawn by rumors of unusual strength. They tested the children as they always did. Most failed. Some screamed. Some died. When they reached Tenebrae, they felt nothing from him at first. No fear, no hunger, no ambition. That disturbed them. They struck him to provoke response. He endured. They threatened him with death. He watched. When one of them killed another child to test his reaction, as Tenebrae's gaze did not change. Not because he was cruel, because cruelty required feeling something. The Sith argued among themselves. Some saw weakness, others sensed danger. One of them finally realized the truth. The boy was not empty. He was sealed. His emotions were not absent. They were locked away, untouched, preserved. When Tenebrae spoke, it was rarely. His words were precise, never wasted, never defensive. When asked what he wanted, he answered honestly, "I want nothing." That answer followed him. As days passed, the Sith noticed subtle things. Objects shifting when his focus narrowed. Flames bending away from him. People feeling smaller in his presence, though he never moved closer. The dark side did not surge through him. It aligned with him. One night, alone among the ruins, Tenebrae understood something without being taught. Attachment was a vulnerability. Love was leverage. Hope was a promise the galaxy never kept. He did not reject these things in anger. He released them calmly. From that moment on, he no longer wondered why his mother died. The question no longer mattered. The galaxy was not cruel. It was consistent. Those who could take, lived. Those who could not, vanished. Tenebrae accepted this truth without resentment. And in that acceptance, something far more dangerous than rage began to take shape. Tenebrae learned to survive by watching others fail. As the village weakened, resources grew scarce. Food, shelter, even safety became things people fought over without thought. Children were sent to steal. Adults turned on neighbors. Strength was measured not by courage, but by how much one could take and keep. Tenebrae did not rush into this chaos. He waited. Waiting taught him more than action ever could. He saw that those who asked were refused. Those who demanded were challenged. But those who simply took, without warning or explanation, were feared. Fear created distance. Distance created safety. This pattern repeated itself again and again until it became undeniable. When hunger returned, Tenebrae did not plead. He took what he needed while others slept. If someone noticed, he did not argue. He did not explain. He met their eyes in silence, unmoving, until doubt replaced anger. Most people stepped back. Those who did not learned quickly. Violence was never his goal. Control was. The Sith overseers continued to observe him from a distance. They tested other children openly, breaking them and shaping them into crude weapons. Tenebrae remained untouched, not because he was overlooked, but because they did not yet understand how to approach him. He did not respond to pain the way others did. He did not respond to praise at all. One Sith attempted a different tactic. He offered instruction, power, a future among the Sith ranks. Tenebrae listened without expression. When asked what he would give in return, the boy answered truthfully, "Nothing." The Sith struck him for that answer. The blow landed hard. Tenebrae did not flinch. He did not hate the Sith for it. Hatred required investment. He simply noted the reaction and stored it away. At night, alone, he practiced what he had learned. He focused on his breathing, on the space between thoughts, on the quiet inside him that never seemed to fade. When anger stirred nearby, and he felt the force tighten, like a current moving toward him. When fear spread, clarity followed. He did not reach outward. He allowed the world to come to him. Slowly, unintentionally, others began to avoid conflict near him. Arguments softened. Fights moved elsewhere. It was not intimidation. It was instinct. Living beings sensed that something about the boy did not follow familiar rules. Tenebrae understood then that survival was not about strength alone. It was about removing oneself from dependency, needing nothing, expecting nothing, taking only what ensured continuation. Everything else was excess. When another child tried to steal from him, Tenebrae stopped him calmly. There was no threat in his voice, no anger in his eyes, only certainty. The child froze, suddenly aware of how exposed he was. Just Tenebrae took back what was his and walked away. That night, he realized something final. Those who asked the galaxy for mercy were destroyed by it. Those who demanded were challenged by it. But those who simply took, without attachment or hesitation, endured. From that moment forward, Tenebrae did not see survival as chance. He saw it as a system, and systems, once understood, could be mastered. The shape of darkness did not arrive all at once. It formed slowly, quietly, without ceremony. Tenebrae did not wake one day and decide to become something else. He simply continued removing what was unnecessary. Fear, hope, attachment. Each was stripped away not through pain, but through understanding. He saw how easily these things were used against others, and how heavy they made those who carried them. The Sith finally took him from the village when there was nothing left to observe. Medrias had served its purpose. The world had broken him in the way only constant violence could. Not into rage, into silence. He left without looking back, because there was nothing behind him that still belonged to him. Among the Sith, Tenebrae was studied, measured, and feared. Not openly. Sith did not fear children. But they feared what could not be provoked, what could not be tempted, what did not react the way it should. Training did not awaken ambition in him. It sharpened awareness. Where others drew strength from anger, Tenebrae drew it from absence. Where others reached for the dark side, it aligned itself with him naturally, as if recognizing a familiar shape. Masters attempted to mold him, to imprint their beliefs, their rules, and their hunger for power. Tenebrae listened, he remembered, and he discarded what did not serve him. The Sith believed they were teaching him how to dominate others. They did not realize he was learning how to dominate himself. He began to understand the Force not as energy, but as permission. Those who believed they needed it were ruled by it. Those who expected it to answer were disappointed. Tenebrae did neither. He waited, and the Force moved when he did. There were moments when others sensed it. A pressure in the air, a quiet narrowing of possibility, not threat, inevitability. Sith acolytes avoided him. Masters spoke around him carefully. Even those stronger than him felt something unsettled in his presence, though they could not name it. At night, when the halls were empty, Tenebrae stood alone and listened, not to voices, not to visions, but to the silence beneath everything. He felt how fragile the galaxy was, how easily entire lives could be erased, how little meaning death truly carried when existence itself was unstable. That was when the final shape began to form. He no longer saw the Sith as rulers of the galaxy. He saw them as participants in a smaller cycle, fighting, conquering, dying, repeating. They were strong, but they were temporary. And temporary things always failed. Tenebrae did not want to rule others. He wanted to outlast them. In that desire there was no passion, no excitement, only certainty. If existence could be consumed, it could be mastered. If life depended on the Force, then the Force itself was a weakness waiting to be exploited. The boy who had learned to take now understood what was worth taking. Not power, not control, but permanence. The galaxy would one day know him by many names. But here, in this moment, he was still only a child who had learned one truth too early. Everything ends, unless someone decides it shouldn't. The night did not arrive suddenly. It settled over Medrias the way it always did, slowly, without warning, without care. Fear had a sound on that world. It was not screaming. It was the quiet shift in voices, the way footsteps changed pace, the way people avoided looking at one another when power entered the space between them. Tenebrae had learned this sound long before he understood words. Fear was not emotion. It was language. He listened to it carefully. By the time he reached his 7th year, violence no longer surprised him. Death passed through the village like weather, taking one body and then another. The Sith who ruled Medrias changed often. Some were cruel, some were careless. All believed fear was control. Tenebrae watched them closely and saw the mistake none of them noticed. Fear did not last. It burned hot and bright, then faded. Those who ruled by it had to renew it again and again, louder each time, stronger, bloodier. Fear demanded effort, and effort revealed weakness. Tenebrae understood this instinctively. He saw how people reacted to pain, how they broke, how they begged, how they promised loyalty they never intended to keep. Fear made people loud, desperate, predictable, and predictability, he learned, was something that could be used. The Sith, overseeing the village, began testing the children more openly. Hunger was no longer accidental. It was deliberate. They wanted to see who would fight, who would steal, who would turn on others first. Most did. Survival stripped away restraint quickly. Tenebrae waited. When children fought over food, and he observed which blows ended arguments and which only prolonged them. When adults punished thieves, he watched how guilt weakened their resolve. Fear softened them. It made them hesitate. Hesitation created opportunity. One night, a boy older than him followed Tenebrae back to a storage pit. The boy was starving, desperate, fearful. He asked first. Tenebrae said nothing. The boy reached for the food anyway. Tenebrae did not shout. He did not threaten. He did not warn. He acted. The movement was simple, efficient. A stone lifted by the force, not hurled in anger, but guided with precision. It struck the boy's head with enough force to silence him forever. There was no struggle, no scream, just stillness. Tenebrae stood there for a long time afterward, watching, listening. Something inside him shifted, not with shock, but with clarity. The world did not react. The force did not recoil. The night continued as if nothing had changed. And that was the lesson. Killing did not break reality. It did not disturb balance. It simply removed an obstacle. He dragged the body away before morning. No one noticed. Or perhaps they did and understood enough not to ask. Fear returned to the village, but it was quieter now, more careful. Something had changed, though no one could name it. Tenebrae did not feel triumph. He did not feel guilt. He felt confirmation. Fear was not power. Fear was noise. Control came from certainty, from action without hesitation, from understanding exactly how much force was required, and no more. When the Sith returned and noticed one child missing, they questioned the others. No answers came. Fear had taught them silence. But Tenebrae knew something deeper now. Fear could be spoken. Pain could be endured. But death ended all language. And for the first time, the force around him felt closer. Not warmer, not louder, just aligned. This was not the loss of innocence. Innocence had died long before. This was the moment Tenebrae learned that fear was a tool, and killing was simply the quietest way to use it. Blood did not shock Tenebrae. It explained things. After the boy was gone, the village did not collapse into chaos. It adjusted. Space closed where the absence should have screamed. The pit was quieter. The paths shifted. Hunger moved on to another target. Tenebrae watched this with the same calm attention he had always given storms and fire. Death did not interrupt life. It reorganized it. He noticed how fear changed shape, and it no longer searched for a source. It spread outward, cautious and uncertain. People spoke less. They guarded what they had. No one accused anyone else, because accusation invited retaliation. The silence felt heavier now, but also cleaner. Tenebrae understood that blood had answered a question fear could not. The Sith overseers sensed the change immediately. They did not know what had happened, only that something had. The force around the village felt tighter, more focused. They questioned the children again, harder this time. They used pain, they used threats, they promised protection. No one spoke. Tenebrae did not lower his eyes. He did not harden them either. He stood as he always had, present but unreachable. When one of the Sith looked into him through the Force, he felt resistance, not defiance, not concealment, alignment. The Sith withdrew, unsettled, unsure why. That night, Tenebrae returned to the place where it had happened. The ground was dark where the stone had struck. He knelt and placed his hand there, not in remembrance, but in measurement. He wanted to understand the moment precisely. What had changed inside him? What had not? There was no echo of guilt, no surge of pleasure, only a narrowing of possibility. He saw that killing was not an act of rage or cruelty. It was a decision that ended uncertainty. Fear argued, pain delayed, death concluded. From that moment, the Force responded differently to him, not stronger, clearer. When he focused, it moved without friction. When he released it, it lingered, as if reluctant to leave. Tenebrae did not mistake this for approval. The dark side did not judge. It recognized patterns, and it had recognized his. The Sith began to train him directly after that, not because they knew what he had done, but because the village had grown quieter around him. Children stepped aside. Adults avoided his path. Order had formed without command. The Sith valued order. They taught him control through pain, but pain no longer taught him anything. They taught him dominance through anger, but anger felt wasteful. Still, he learned their forms, their language, their rituals. Knowledge was useful, even when methods were flawed. When asked why he never hesitated, Tenebrae answered simply, "Hesitation invites loss." One Sith laughed at that. Another remembered it. Tenebrae did not think of the boy he had killed. The memory was not avoided. It was complete, finished. Had he understood then that death only haunted those who remained uncertain about themselves? He was not. Blood had answered the final question of his childhood, whether the galaxy would punish him for acting without mercy. It had not. The galaxy had adjusted, as it always did, and so Tenebrae adjusted with it. He was no longer waiting to see what the world would do to him. He was watching to see how little it took to make the world move. Killing had not awakened something new. It had confirmed what was already there. Tenebrae learned quickly that power changed when no one was watching. The Sith valued displays. They taught dominance through spectacle, pain made visible, fear made loud. Punishments were public, victories were announced. Strength, in their eyes, had to be witnessed to exist, and Tenebrae absorbed these lessons without believing them. He had already learned something deeper. The most effective acts left no audience at all. As training intensified, he noticed how others behaved when eyes were upon them. They performed, they exaggerated anger. They spoke loudly of loyalty. In private, they doubted. They feared. They resented. The gap between who they were and who they pretended to be widened every day. Tenebrae watched that gap and understood its weakness. When he acted without witnesses, there was no need to explain, no reputation to protect, no narrative to maintain. Action became pure, clean, uncontested. The Sith Masters tested him constantly. They pushed him into conflict with other acolytes, expecting rivalry to awaken ambition. Instead, Tenebrae ended confrontations quickly, not brutally, precisely. He used just enough force to remove resistance, then stepped away. There was no satisfaction in victory that required acknowledgement. Other acolytes began to fear him quietly, not because he boasted, but because he did not. His silence left no room to predict his limits. When conflicts arose, they happened elsewhere. When alliances formed, they excluded him. Isolation suited him. At night, Tenebrae practiced alone. He refined his connection to the Force without ritual or instruction. He learned how little effort was required to bend reality when intention was absolute. The dark side did not surge through him in waves. It settled, steady and patient. He did not feel chosen. He felt aligned. He began to understand that the Force responded not to emotion, but to certainty. Anger worked because it removed doubt, or fear failed because it multiplied it. Tenebrae removed doubt directly. The Force followed. There were moments when masters sensed his growth and grew uneasy. They tested him with deception, with false praise, with sudden cruelty. None of it landed. Praise meant nothing. Cruelty taught nothing. Deception was simply another pattern to observe. One master attempted to bind him through fear of loss. He threatened isolation, removal, death. Tenebrae listened and answered calmly, "You can only take what I still need." The master struck him for that response, but the blow carried uncertainty. He felt it. And Tenebrae felt that too. From then on, training became cautious. The Sith had begun to realize that the boy did not require witnesses to grow. He did not require approval. He did not even require opposition. He was becoming something self-contained. And that frightened them in a way anger never could. Tenebrae understood then that true power did not announce itself. It did not demand recognition. It did not need followers to confirm its existence. Power that depended on being seen was fragile. Power that functioned in silence was permanent. He no longer thought in terms of dominance over others. That was a small goal, suited to small minds. He thought instead about removing all variables. Witnesses created variables. Attachment created variables. Emotion created variables. So he stripped them away. What remained was action without echo, force without display, power without witness. And in that quiet, Tenebrae took another step away from being a child, and closer to becoming something the Sith had never intended to create. And there are moments that cannot be reversed, no matter how much time passes afterward. Tenebrae understood this before the Sith ever named it. The first killing had not been an accident. The second was not hesitation. By the time the Sith began to sense what was forming, the change had already settled into permanence. Something inside the boy had crossed a threshold, and there was no path back across it. The Sith tested him one final time, though they did not realize it was final. They arranged a trial in silence, not announced, not observed by crowds. An acolyte was brought to him in the night, restrained, terrified, chosen at random. The message was simple: prove loyalty, prove control, prove you belong. Tenebrae looked at the acolyte and felt nothing, not anger, not hatred, not curiosity, only recognition. And this was another variable the Sith believed they could manage. Another demonstration they believed would bind him to them. They were wrong. He killed the acolyte without force lightning, without spectacle, without cruelty. A single, deliberate action. Clean. Final. No witnesses remained except the Force itself, and even it did not resist. When it was done, Tenebrae did not wait for approval. He did not search for reaction. He walked away, understanding something clearly for the first time. This was no longer about survival. It was about direction. The Sith Masters felt the shift too late. In the Force, Tenebrae no longer felt like a student. He felt like a fixed point, something immovable around which others now adjusted. Their power pressed against him and slid away, unable to find purchase. They debated what to do with him. Some argued for destruction, others for elevation. All of them sensed the same thing beneath their arguments. Fear, not of rebellion, of replacement. Tenebrae listened when summoned. He spoke when required. He obeyed when obedience cost him nothing. But inwardly, the connection had already severed. The Sith were no longer teachers. They were examples of limitation. He began to think beyond them, not of overthrow, not of conquest. Those were small outcomes. He thought instead of endurance, of permanence, of how fragile even Sith Lords were when bound to bodies, to time, to ambition that burned itself out. The dark side no longer felt like a tool. It felt like a medium, something that could be shaped slowly, patiently, without urgency. Tenebrae did not rush toward power. He allowed it to accumulate around him naturally, like gravity forming around mass. The boy who once learned to take had learned something greater. Some acts cannot be undone because they do not wound the world. They reveal it. Killing had not damaged Tenebrae's soul. It had clarified it. There was no inner conflict left to resolve, no guilt to bury, no fear to outgrow. The questions that haunted others never formed inside him at all. From this point forward, there would be no turning back to childhood, no alternate path where mercy survived, no future in which he wondered who he might have been. That future had ended quietly, without witnesses, and in its place stood something unfinished, patient, and dangerous. A presence that would one day devour worlds not out of rage, but because nothing inside it remembered how to stop. They did not ask him if he wished to join the Sith. They never asked children that question. Tenebrae was taken from Medrias in silence, moved through corridors and ships without explanation. The village vanished behind him without ceremony, just another place consumed by time. No one said goodbye. No one expected him to look back. He did not. What waited ahead mattered more than what had already proven weak. The Sith enclave was older than the villages it ruled. Its stones carried the weight of rituals repeated until meaning blurred into habit. Tenebrae felt it immediately. Not power, but hunger. A constant pull beneath every word spoken, every lesson taught. This was not a sanctuary, it was a furnace. Other children arrived frightened, some angry, some hopeful. Tenebrae arrived empty, and that difference was noted. The Sith called it recruitment. In truth, it was selection through erosion. Sleep was limited, food was measured, pain was applied with purpose. They wanted to see which minds cracked first, which bodies failed, which spirits broke and reshaped themselves into obedience. Tenebrae did not break. He listened while others shouted. He watched while others struck. He remembered every rule, every punishment, every contradiction. The Sith spoke of strength, yet feared dissent. They spoke of mastery, yet clung to tradition. They spoke of evolution, yet repeated the same failures endlessly. Tenebrae learned faster than they expected. He studied their rituals with care, not reverence. Incantations, sacrifices, meditations drawn from ancient Sith texts were presented as sacred truth. Tenebrae treated them as language, as symbols meant to guide the Force through specific shapes, useful but not absolute. When he performed rituals, the results came easily, not violently, not explosively, smoothly. The Force responded as if it had been waiting for him to stop hesitating. Masters noticed. They mistook his calm for discipline, his silence for loyalty. They praised restraint, believing they had succeeded in shaping him. Tenebrae accepted praise the way he accepted pain, without attachment, without memory. He was taught Sith history as warning and inspiration. Great lords who rose and fell, empires built on fear and shattered by betrayal. The lessons focused on dominance and survival. Tenebrae saw something else. Every story ended the same way. Power burned itself out. That pattern interested him. At night, alone, he practiced without instruction. Yet he removed gestures from techniques, words from rituals, anger from control. What remained was efficient, stable, repeatable. The Force did not resist him. It organized itself around his intent. The Sith believed they were consuming him, drawing him deeper into their order. They did not realize consumption worked both ways. Tenebrae did not reject the Sith. He absorbed them, their teachings, their limits, their mistakes. Each lesson refined his understanding of what they were and what they could never become. By the time the masters agreed he belonged among them, the decision no longer mattered. The order had already served its purpose. It had given him access, structure, time. They thought they had taken a child and made him Sith. In truth, they had taken a silence and taught it their shape, and that shape would not hold. Some power had a grammar, and the Sith believed they alone spoke it fluently. Tenebrae listened as masters explained the dark side in rigid terms. Anger was fuel, pain was focus, fear was leverage. Every lesson reduced the Force to an emotion that could be summoned on command. A shout, a wound, a memory pulled open again and again. The results impressed the observers. They mistook intensity for depth. Tenebrae learned the words. He did not adopt the meaning. He noticed that anger worked only because it erased doubt. Pain worked only because it demanded attention. Fear worked only because it narrowed choice. These were not sources of power. They were shortcuts around uncertainty. Useful, but unstable. When emotion faded, so did control. In training chambers, he watched acolytes exhaust themselves chasing feeling. Rage burned hot, then collapsed. Despair swallowed them whole. Masters encouraged this cycle, believing suffering refined strength. Tenebrae refined something else: precision. He practiced without display. He removed unnecessary motion. He reduced technique until only intention remained. When he focused, the Force responded evenly, without surge or recoil. This unsettled instructors. They expected resistance. They expected spectacle. They received quiet compliance. Language mattered to the Sith. Names, titles, declarations of allegiance. Tenebrae learned when to speak and when silence carried greater weight. He learned how promises trapped those who made them, how vows created expectations that could be turned into chains. He never vowed anything. During rituals, he followed instructions exactly, then repeated them alone and altered each step. Our words were shortened, gestures simplified, sacrifice removed. The results did not weaken. They stabilized. The Force flowed with less turbulence, less cost. A master noticed and warned him that tradition existed for a reason. Tenebrae asked which tradition had prevented the Sith from destroying themselves. The answer was pain. The punishment followed. The lesson remained. He studied ancient texts, not as doctrine, but as records of failure. Lords who sought immortality through rage. Empires sustained by terror. Apprentices trained to overthrow their masters and repeat the cycle. Each believed themselves exceptional. Each vanished. Tenebrae did not want exception. He wanted continuation. He began to understand that power did not come from emotion, but from removing dependence on it. If anger was required, one was powerless without it. And if pain was required, one remained vulnerable. True control meant acting without needing to feel anything at all. The Sith believed emotion bound the Force to the user. Tenebrae saw the inverse. Emotion bound the user to the Force. He began to loosen that bond, carefully, patiently. Masters praised his restraint, unaware it was not discipline but detachment. They believed he was learning obedience. He was learning independence. Each lesson added vocabulary to his understanding, and each discarded rule made his fluency clearer. Power, he learned, was not spoken loudly. It was spoken correctly. And Tenebrae was becoming fluent. The masters believed they were watching him closely. They were not. They measured progress through obedience, through ritual precision, through how loudly the dark side answered a command. So Tenebrae fulfilled every visible requirement. He bowed when expected. He spoke when questioned. He performed techniques without error. To them, this meant success. What they did not see was how little of himself he revealed. Each master projected expectation onto him. One saw a future enforcer. Another imagined a loyal servant. A third believed he sensed hidden ambition waiting to be unleashed. None of them questioned the assumption that ambition looked like hunger, or that hunger required desire. Tenebrae desired nothing they could recognize. He listened when they spoke of legacy, of ruling systems and breaking enemies. He watched their expressions tighten when they spoke of rivals. He felt their fear beneath the confidence, the knowledge that every Sith eventually faced replacement. Their teachings were shaped by this fear. Their cruelty was defensive. Tenebrae stored this information carefully. When masters argued among themselves, he learned more than any lesson provided. Power fractured easily when shared. Authority decayed when questioned. Even the strongest Sith guarded their position more than they pursued growth. Survival had replaced evolution. They taught him to seek apprentices one day, to rule through dominance, to expect betrayal. Tenebrae accepted these lessons without protest. He understood their origin. Masters who could imagine nothing beyond the cycle taught only how to endure it. In private, he tested the limits of what they believed he understood. He masked his presence in the Force, not by hiding, but by remaining still. Masters searched for fluctuation, for intent, for hunger. They found nothing alarming and moved on. One master attempted to bind him emotionally, encouraging pride, praising his advancement, promising future authority. Tenebrae nodded and said nothing. Pride required comparison. Comparison required care. He had already moved beyond both. Another attempted to provoke anger, withholding instruction and humiliating him publicly. Tenebrae absorbed the insult without response. The master interpreted this as submission. He did not realize that his authority had ceased to matter the moment Tenebrae stopped reacting. They believed they were shaping him through pressure. They did not realize pressure only worked on structures that resisted it. Tenebrae did not resist. He adapted. Over time, the masters began to rely on him. He resolved conflicts cleanly. He executed tasks without complication. He did not seek recognition or challenge authority. In their eyes, he was stable, useful, controlled. They mistook silence for loyalty. Tenebrae saw them now as they truly were, not tyrants, not gods, but caretakers of a failing system, repeating rituals that preserved their own relevance while preventing progress. They feared extinction and so taught stagnation. He no longer needed to question them. Their limitations were clear. The Sith thought they were watching a student rise. They did not see that they had already become irrelevant. And in that blindness, they continued to teach him everything he needed to outgrow them. The Sith believed consumption was proof of strength. They were wrong. They fed on anger, on pain, on fear, believing these things endless. Each generation devoured the next, master shaping apprentice, with the quiet certainty that betrayal would come. And this cycle was not questioned, it was celebrated. To the Sith, extinction was simply failure to dominate quickly enough. Tenebrae saw it differently. Every lesson they gave him confirmed the same truth. The Sith destroyed themselves not through weakness, but through design. They trained successors to replace them. They glorified conflict that ensured instability. They consumed everything around them, including their own future. And they did it willingly. They taught Tenebrae to take, to dominate, to rise above others by breaking them. What they did not realize was that he was watching the cost of this approach. Empires burned bright and vanished. Lords achieved power and died surrounded by enemies they had created themselves. The Sith believed the dark side was infinite. Tenebrae saw that their methods were not. He began to understand that true dominance was not measured by how much one could destroy, but by how long one could remain. Rage burned fuel too quickly. Fear required constant renewal. Betrayal ensured eventual collapse. The Sith were powerful, but inefficient. And inefficiency always ended the same way. They continued to elevate him. Titles followed. Authority grew. Access widened. He moved through their hierarchy without resistance, not because he fought for it, but because he did not threaten it. He was useful, predictable, silent. They never questioned why he asked nothing in return. Tenebrae absorbed everything they offered: knowledge, resources, time. Each gift strengthened his understanding of what must be discarded. He did not reject the Sith teachings. He refined them by omission. So the Order believed it was shaping the ultimate Sith, a perfect weapon, a culmination of tradition. They spoke of him as proof that their ways still worked. They did not realize they were feeding the very thing that would end them. Tenebrae no longer saw himself as part of the Sith future. He saw himself as beyond it. The Order was a tool, temporary, necessary only until it had given him all it could. In quiet moments, he began to think not of ruling others, but of removing limits altogether. Not conquest, continuity, not empire, permanence. The Sith had given him everything he needed by showing him what not to become. And so, without open defiance, without declaration, Tenebrae stepped beyond them in spirit long before he ever would in action. They continued their rituals. They repeated their wars. They trained their replacements. And all the while, they fed the end of their own story, believing until the last moment that they were still in control. Power did not rush toward Tenebrae. It waited. By the time the Sith began to speak of thrones and succession, he had already learned the value of patience. Others competed openly, grasping for influence, measuring themselves through conflict. Tenebrae remained still. He listened while rivals exposed their ambitions. He watched while masters revealed their fears. Every struggle around him confirmed the same truth. Those who hurried toward power were the first to lose it. The Sith hierarchy fractured slowly, as it always did. Councils argued. Lords tested one another. Betrayals unfolded in quiet corridors long before blades were drawn. Tenebrae did not participate. He observed. He understood that chaos was not a failure of the system. It was the system. He positioned himself carefully, not at the center of attention, but at the point where information passed unnoticed. Messages reached him before they reached others. Secrets settled near him without effort. Sith confided in him because he offered no judgment, no reaction. Silence invited honesty. When masters fell, he did not celebrate. When rivals vanished, he did not advance immediately. He waited for the space to cool, for the dust to settle, for the survivors to doubt themselves. Only then did he step forward, offering stability in a structure that had begun to rot. They accepted. They always did. Tenebrae did not seize authority through force. He was invited into it. Sith Lords, exhausted by endless conflict, saw him as neutral ground, a figure untouched by faction, unburdened by visible ambition. They mistook absence for restraint. They mistook patience for loyalty. He allowed the misunderstanding to grow. As his influence expanded, he changed nothing at first. The same rituals continued, the same punishments, the same language of fear and dominance. He understood that sudden reform created resistance. Familiar cruelty was comforting to those who lived within it. Privately, he began removing threats, not through execution, through redirection. Sith who might oppose him were sent outward, given campaigns, distractions, responsibilities far from the core. Those who remained grew dependent on his presence to maintain balance. The throne that formed around him was not declared. It assembled itself. When Sith spoke of leadership, his name surfaced without encouragement. When decisions stalled, his judgment was requested. He never demanded obedience. He provided resolution. Over time, a resolution became authority. Tenebrae understood that a throne built on fear collapsed when fear faded. A throne built on dependency endured. He made himself necessary, not intimidating. The Sith did not kneel before him. They relied on him. By the time they realized the structure had changed, there was no single moment to resist, no dramatic coup to prevent. Power had shifted through habit, not conquest. Tenebrae stood at the center of the order, without proclamation, without coronation, without challenge. He had not overthrown the Sith. He had outlasted them. This was not the rise of an emperor. It was the quiet conclusion of a waiting game that had already been decided. Betrayal did not arrive with screams or open blades. It arrived as permission. Tenebrae understood that the Sith expected treachery. They trained for it, or prepared for it. In many ways, they welcomed it, because betrayal gave meaning to their endless struggle. What they did not expect was betrayal that felt reasonable, necessary, almost merciful. He began by listening. Lords came to him privately, exhausted by rivals who would not yield. Masters confided fears of apprentices growing too ambitious. Each conversation ended the same way. Tenebrae did not promise protection. He did not threaten action. He offered understanding. He framed betrayal not as ambition, but as stability. "You are not wrong to fear this," he would say calmly. "Chaos weakens us all." And they believed him. Plans formed without his direct involvement. Sith moved against one another, believing the decision was their own. Tenebrae never ordered assassinations. He suggested distance, delay, reassignment. And when violence occurred, it did so without his name attached. When rivals fell, their enemies were blamed. The structure cleaned itself. One by one, the Sith who might have challenged him vanished. Some died in ritual combat. Others were sent to distant systems and never returned. A few simply disappeared, their absence explained away as failure. Each loss tightened the order around Tenebrae's presence. No alarms sounded, no rebellions ignited. The Sith believed this was business as usual. Those closest to him felt safe. He never punished them, never humiliated them. Loyalty to Tenebrae was rewarded with predictability, something the Sith rarely offered. They mistook calm for weakness. They did not see how deeply they depended on it. When the Dark Council fractured completely, the transition felt inevitable. A Sith who survived the purges needed someone untouched by factional blood, someone neutral, someone already trusted. Tenebrae accepted the role without ceremony. He did not declare himself ruler. He allowed others to speak the title first. Those who hesitated were given time. Those who resisted were isolated. No executions followed. No displays of dominance, just distance. Influence dried up around dissenters until their voices carried no weight. Betrayal without noise left no martyrs. In the Force, something shifted. The Sith Order no longer felt like a storm. It felt contained, directed. Tenebrae did not dominate through fear. He removed uncertainty. Sith stopped watching one another and began watching him instead, waiting for guidance they no longer knew how to provide themselves. That was when he understood the final lesson. That power did not require loyalty. It required absence of alternatives. By the time the last opposing voices faded, there was no one left to betray him. The Sith had betrayed themselves willingly, each choice justified by survival, stability, or ambition. Tenebrae had simply arranged the conditions. He stood alone at the center of an order that no longer remembered how to function without him. This was not a coup. It was an ending disguised as continuity. And somewhere beneath the surface of the Force, something ancient stirred. Aware that a line had been crossed without resistance, without witnesses, and without regret. Nathema was not chosen by chance. It was chosen because it was already dying. The world had once been called Medrias, scarred by centuries of Sith war, its surface cracked by old rituals and careless violence. Life there survived only through endurance, not growth. Tenebrae remembered it as a place where nothing was given freely, where survival demanded constant extraction. It was fitting. The planet understood hunger. By the time he returned, he no longer came as a child of that world. He came as its final witness. The Sith believed they were preparing a great ritual to secure dominance. They spoke of sacrifice, of channeling the dark side through living conduits, of binding power into permanence. Tenebrae listened and allowed them to believe the design was theirs. He refined the details quietly, removing inefficiencies, widening the scope, deepening the draw. They did not realize the ritual was not meant to empower the Sith. It was meant to empty the world. When the circle was formed, Sith Lords gathered in confidence. They trusted Tenebrae completely now. His calm had never betrayed them. His guidance had never failed. They followed instructions precisely, unaware that precision was exactly what doomed them. The ritual began without resistance. The Force responded immediately, drawn inward like breath pulled from a collapsing lung. Life across Nathema weakened at once. Plants withered. Animals fell silent. Even the Sith felt something wrong, though none could stop what had already aligned. Tenebrae stood at the center, not chanting, not reaching. He allowed the Force to move through him without obstruction. This was not theft, it was release. He removed the barrier that separated the world from consumption. The Sith screamed as they realized the truth. Their power did not grow, it vanished. And their connection to the dark side was severed as life itself drained away. They were not being sacrificed for Tenebrae. They were being erased with everything else. In moments, Nathema became hollow. The Force fell silent. Not calm, not balanced. Empty. An entire world stripped of presence, memory, and echo. No voices remained to haunt it. No life lingered to mourn it. Tenebrae remained. He felt the transformation immediately. Time loosened its grip. The need for sustenance faded. The boundaries of flesh felt optional. He was no longer bound to cycles that ended in decay. The hunger inside him did not disappear. It clarified. The man who had been Tenebrae ended on that world. What rose from the silence was something else. a consciousness no longer anchored to one body, one moment, or one lifetime. He did not claim victory, yet he accepted inevitability. Nathema became a wound in the Force, a place where life could not return, because nothing remained to return to. The Sith, who dreamed of ruling forever, had instead created a void that answered only to him. This was not immortality earned through rage or defiance. It was immortality taken through understanding. Tenebrae did not look back as the last energies faded. There was nothing left to acknowledge. The ritual had done exactly what it was meant to do. A world had ended. A man had ended. And something that could not die had begun. Immortality did not arrive as triumph. It arrived as need. When the last echo of life vanished from Nathema, Tenebrae did not feel relief. He felt expansion. His awareness stretched beyond the limits he had once known, no longer confined to breath or heartbeat. The silence of the planet did not resist him. It accepted him, as if the world itself understood its purpose had been fulfilled. He was still present, but not contained. The force around him no longer flowed. It had been stripped away so completely that even memory could not cling to it. Nathema became an absence, a place where the force could not speak. In that void, Tenebrae discovered what he had truly become, not immortal in the way Sith had always imagined, not endless life bound to flesh, something colder, more durable. He did not need to draw power anymore. Power existed through him. His body felt distant, like a tool rather than an anchor. He sensed that it could be replaced if damaged, abandoned if destroyed. What mattered was the will behind it, the consciousness sustained by consumption. The ritual had not ended hunger, and it had perfected it. For the first time, Tenebrae felt something close to satisfaction. Not joy, not pride, completion. The question that had followed him since childhood had been answered. Survival no longer depended on others. Time no longer threatened him. Death no longer applied. But hunger remained. It was quieter now, deeper, and far more dangerous. No longer the hunger of a child stealing food, or a Sith craving power. It was the hunger of something that could persist only by taking life itself. Worlds, populations, entire histories. Sustenance had scaled with existence. Tenebrae understood this without panic. Hunger was not a flaw, it was function. He took a new name, not as disguise, but as acknowledgement. Tenebrae had been a man shaped by silence and patience. What rose from Nathema required something grander, as something that could rule from shadow without explanation. Thus, Darth Vitiate was born. The Sith would never know Tenebrae had died on Nathema. They would only know that something eternal now stood above them. An emperor who did not age, a voice that did not weaken, a presence that could not be challenged because it could not be reached. Vitiate did not announce his transformation. He returned to the galaxy quietly, carrying the echo of a dead world within him. Sith who stood before him felt it immediately, a pressure that did not threaten but erased doubt. They bowed not because they were ordered to, but because resistance felt meaningless. The Emperor did not rule through passion. He ruled through inevitability. The hunger inside him did not demand constant feeding, but it promised eventual consumption. Whispered of greater rituals, greater silences, of a galaxy that could one day resemble Nathema if left unchecked. Vitiate did not rush toward that future. He waited. Patience had carried him this far. He had outlived his teachers. He had outgrown his order. He had stepped beyond death itself. What remained was not conquest, but endurance. The galaxy would come to fear his name, but it would never understand him. Not truly. because the truth was too simple, too quiet, too final. The Emperor did not seek to rule forever. He sought to never stop existing. And with that hunger settled into permanence, the Sith Emperor turned his gaze outward, toward a galaxy that still believed life was permanent. The galaxy did not know his face. It only felt the shape of his absence. Darth Vitiate ruled from places no map recorded and no senate debated. He did not stand before crowds or announce his victories. His presence moved through intermediaries, through masked voices and sealed commands that arrived without explanation. To most of the galaxy, he was not a man. He was a pressure that never lifted. Those who served him rarely met him. They felt him instead. A weight in the force that pressed inward, quiet but absolute. Orders arrived already final. Questions dissolved before they were spoken. Loyalty was not demanded. It was assumed. The Sith Empire reorganized itself around that silence. Councils still existed. Titles still mattered. Armies still marched. But the center had shifted. Decisions no longer emerged from debate or rivalry. They emerged from alignment. Those who understood the Emperor's will prospered. Those who did not faded from relevance without punishment. Vitiate did not correct mistakes publicly. He allowed systems to fail until they revealed who could adapt. Failure was instruction. Survival was confirmation. In this way, the Empire refined itself continuously, without reform or mercy. To the Republic, the Sith Empire felt distant and unreal. Threats appeared at borders without warning. Entire systems fell into darkness and then stabilized under new rule, as if conquest had been administrative rather than violent. The enemy could not be negotiated with because no one knew who spoke for him. Vitiate did not lead from the front. He did not need to. And he had learned long ago that visibility created vulnerability. A visible ruler invited challenge. An unseen one became myth. Among the Sith, his name was spoken carefully, not with devotion, with caution. Lords did not boast of serving him. They feared being noticed. Attention from the Emperor meant relevance, but it also meant exposure, and exposure led to testing. Those who stood before him described the same experience. Not terror, not awe, stillness. A sense that resistance had already been accounted for and dismissed. The Emperor did not argue. He did not persuade. He observed, then spoke only when the outcome no longer required discussion. He allowed his servants to believe they had influence. He let them shape policy, command fleets, wage wars. All of it fed into a larger design they could not perceive. Every conflict and every expansion, every betrayal added motion to a machine that did not slow. The Emperor did not measure success in territory or obedience. He measured it in continuity. The Empire endured because it did not rely on him being present. His absence was the structure, his silence was the rule. Across the galaxy, whispers spread. Some called him immortal. Others claimed he was an idea, not a being. Stories contradicted one another, and Vitiate encouraged the confusion. A ruler with one story could be targeted. A ruler with many became impossible to define. He did not correct myths. He let fear invent its own explanations. In the Force, his presence was unmistakable. Not loud, not aggressive, constant. Like gravity, it shaped movement without announcing itself. Jedi sensed something wrong, long before they understood what they were sensing. And a darkness without emotion. A will without anger. The galaxy lived beneath his shadow long before it knew to fear it. And Darth Vitiate remained unseen, unchallenged, and perfectly content to let the galaxy imagine whatever it needed to survive another day. War under Vitiate was not designed to be won, because victory ended motion, and motion was what sustained the Emperor's endless, patient existence across galaxies. Battles ignited along borders, then froze into stalemates, not through failure, but through careful imbalance that prevented collapse on either side of galactic power structures. The Sith Empire advanced, withdrew, and advanced again, keeping conflict alive like a controlled fire that never burned itself out across multiple star systems eternally. Vitiate did not seek decisive conquest, because endings starved him, while prolonged suffering generated the steady flow he required to sustain his immortal consciousness forever. Wars became instruments, not objectives. Their purpose, hidden even from generals who believed they were fighting for dominance within the broader imperial design of eternity. Entire fleets vanished without explanation, while others were spared, creating legends of luck and curses that distracted from deliberate orchestration by the unseen imperial hand. The Republic searched for strategy, for meaning, for an end, never realizing the enemy did not measure success the same way across this endless conflict. Vitiate watched conflicts unfold like slow tides, each loss and victory balancing another, ensuring the galaxy never settled into lasting peace, order, stability, or certainty. Peace would have ended consumption, and so peace was avoided through whispers, delays, and commands that redirected momentum within fleets, councils, borders, alliances, sectors, continually. Sith Lords believed they were testing enemies, while in truth, they were maintaining a rhythm set far above them by the Emperor's unseen design and alone. Generations grew within war, born into conflict so constant it felt natural, shaping cultures that forgot how peace worked across countless worlds, systems, eras, cycles. For Vitiate, this endless tension fed his existence, each life spent reinforcing the permanence he had stolen from death, time, decay, mortality, fate, history itself. He did not hate the galaxy for suffering. Suffering was simply the condition that allowed him to remain present, conscious, enduring, aware, eternal, sustained, awake. And every battle delayed final collapse, keeping existence stretched thin enough for his hunger to draw from it without resistance, interruption, exhaustion, balance, closure, conclusion, end. The galaxy bled slowly, and the Emperor ensured the wound never closed, never healed, never scarred through endless cycles of managed war, loss, fear, survival. To those fighting, the wars felt tragic and meaningless, but to Vitiate, they were carefully tuned sustenance feeding his immortal hunger, will, presence, shadow, forever. He never rushed outcomes, allowing years to pass between moves, because time itself now belonged to him alone, entirely, absolutely, without threat, limit, decay, end. Armies marched believing destiny guided them, unaware they were simply fuel moving through a silent engine built for endurance, consumption, continuity, a hunger, survival, eternity, shadow. Vitiate did not watch battles for spectacle, but for balance, ensuring no side tipped too far toward victory, collapse, extinction, dominance, peace, resolution, closure, finality. When one power grew strong, he weakened it. When another faltered, he sustained it quietly through subtle orders, delays, diversions, retreats, reinforcements, whispers, shadows, patience. Thus, the wars never truly ended, only shifted location, name, and justification across eras of galactic history, conflict, ambition, fear, suffering, power, illusion, cycles, endlessness. The galaxy believed it fought for survival, unaware survival itself was the commodity being harvested by an immortal emperor, patiently, silently, endlessly, methodically, deliberately, eternally. Vitiate remained distant and allowing hatred to focus elsewhere, never upon the true source of suffering, manipulation, design, control, hunger, endurance, permanence, shadow, origin, cause, architect. In this way, war became climate rather than event, a constant pressure shaping every decision made by worlds, leaders, soldiers, families, generations, cultures, lives, futures. And beneath it all, the Emperor fed, unseen, unchallenged, content to let the galaxy burn slowly, for as long as existence continued, endured, persisted, survived. Silence was not absence to Darth Vitiate. It was nourishment. Between wars, between reports of victory and loss, there were long stretches where nothing seemed to happen. No fleets moved. No worlds fell. The galaxy breathed, believing the worst had passed. These were the moments Vitiate valued most. Not the screams of battle, but the quiet that followed, when fear settled into memory and grief learned to live without witnesses. He did not feed only on death. He fed on aftermath. Worlds scarred by conflict grew cautious. Leaders spoke carefully. Populations learned to endure rather than resist. Hope dimmed into routine. In that stillness, Vitiate's presence deepened. He did not need attention. He needed resignation. Acceptance created less resistance than terror ever could. Within the Sith Empire, silence became policy. Orders were brief, explanations rare. Commanders learned not to ask questions that had no answers. Information flowed upward, but little returned. The Emperor's will was felt most strongly when it was not expressed at all. Those closest to him noticed the pattern, but never named it. After great losses, he delayed response. After triumphs, and he remained distant. Emotion was allowed to exhaust itself before he acted. He understood that silence forced others to fill the void with their own fear and doubt. In the Force, his presence grew heavier during these pauses. Jedi who reached outward felt something vast and patient watching back. Not hunting, waiting. They described it as standing at the edge of a deep ocean, unable to see what moved beneath the surface. Vitiate did not pursue the Jedi directly. Pursuit created resistance. Silence created unease. He allowed them to sense him without understanding, to fear something they could not confront. That fear lingered long after the moment passed, shaping decisions in ways they never traced back to him. Even among the Sith, silence was his greatest weapon. Ambitious lords feared his attention, but they feared his disregard more. Want to be ignored by the Emperor was to drift toward irrelevance. Silence became judgment. Absence became punishment. He learned which voices grew desperate in the quiet, which leaders faltered when reassurance never came, which worlds broke not under attack, but under waiting. Those were the ones most easily shaped later. Vitiate did not require constant consumption. He allowed hunger to stretch, to deepen, to become patient. Silence aged fear like wine, intensifying it without effort. When he finally acted, the galaxy responded quickly, relieved to exchange uncertainty for action, no matter how brutal. The Emperor understood that noise exhausted itself. Silence endured. In the long pauses between conflicts, he refined his control. He extended his awareness across systems, touching minds lightly, leaving impressions rather than commands. And a suggestion here, a hesitation there, small adjustments that redirected futures without leaving marks. No monuments bore his name, no speeches carried his voice. Yet entire eras bent subtly around decisions made in stillness. The galaxy moved according to rhythms it did not recognize, guided by a presence that thrived most when nothing seemed to be happening. Darth Vitiate did not need worship. He needed time, and time, like silence, belonged to him completely. Fear did not need a face to spread. Across the galaxy, stories formed without origin. Worlds spoke of a presence felt in moments of quiet dread, a weight that pressed down without warning. No name attached itself to these whispers, because names implied limits. What people felt had none. On Republic worlds far from battle, citizens sensed unease without cause. Trade slowed. Trust weakened. Leaders hesitated before decisions they once made easily. No enemy fleet waited beyond the horizon, yet anxiety lingered like an approaching storm that never arrived. The Jedi felt it first, though they struggled to describe it. In meditation, the Force felt heavy, as if something vast stood just beyond perception. Not darkness in motion, but darkness at rest, patient, enduring, watching. The Jedi searched for anger, for pain, for hatred. They found none, and that frightened them more. Darth Vitiate understood this reaction. Fear with a source could be confronted. Fear without explanation hollowed resolve from the inside. It eroded certainty. It made action feel dangerous and hesitation feel safe. He allowed myths to grow unchecked. Some believed the Sith Emperor was a ghost, and others claimed he was an ancient weapon awakened by accident. Contradictions strengthened the effect. A threat that could not be defined, could not be planned for. On worlds touched by his empire, fear settled quietly. Occupation felt orderly, predictable. But beneath routine, people sensed something missing. Hope did not die in violence. It faded through compliance. Citizens obeyed because resistance felt pointless, even when punishment was absent. Among the Sith, fear took a different shape. They feared relevance. To be noticed by the Emperor meant testing. To be ignored meant decay. Ambition twisted inward, cautious and restrained. The order grew rigid, careful not to disturb the unseen presence guiding it. Vitiate did not correct misunderstandings. He nurtured them. Fear did not need truth. It needed uncertainty. And he allowed the galaxy to imagine him as monster, god, shadow, or myth. Knowing each image weakened resolve in a different way. The greatest terror was not what he did, but what he might do. Whole strategies formed around avoiding provocation. Entire lives were shaped by decisions made in response to something never seen. By the time the galaxy understood it was afraid, the fear no longer required him. It sustained itself, passed from mind to mind, generation to generation, shaping behavior without command. This was his true dominion. Not rule through force, but rule through anticipation. And beneath that nameless fear, the Emperor remained unseen, eternal, and perfectly content to let the galaxy tremble at the shape of nothing. It spread through generations quietly, changing how parents spoke to children, and how leaders chose caution over courage, how soldiers waited for orders that never came. Fear became inheritance rather than reaction. People learned to live smaller lives, not because they were conquered, but because uncertainty taught them restraint. Even rebellion carried hesitation, shaped by the belief that something unseen watched every step. Vitiate did not need to intervene. The pattern repeated on its own, strengthening with time. Long after battles ended, the unease remained, guiding choices, limiting dreams, narrowing futures. The galaxy adapted to fear the way it adapted to gravity. It became background, constant, unquestioned. In that environment, resistance felt unnatural, silence felt safer. And so the Emperor's shadow endured, not as darkness advancing, but as space closing inward, slowly, endlessly, without resistance. And it continued, patient and vast, until even fear itself seemed normal, and the galaxy forgot there had ever been another way to exist. Thus his reign required no crown, no banners, no proclamations, only time, silence, and the willingness of countless lives to adapt. It was enough to last far longer than anyone alive could imagine alone. The war never reached him. Across the galaxy, fleets collided, worlds changed hands, and generations grew up knowing nothing but conflict. To soldiers on the front lines, the war felt endless and personal. Every loss carried a face. Every victory carried a cost. But far from the burning systems and broken cities, Darth Vitiate remained untouched, as distant as a star that could not be approached. He did not sit in command chambers studying maps. He did not watch battles unfold in real time. Distance was not neglect, it was design. War that reached its ruler invited reaction. War kept at a distance became resource. To the Sith Empire, the conflict with the Republic was framed as destiny. Ancient enemies clashing once more. Strength against weakness. Order against decay. Vitiate allowed these narratives to spread because belief sustained momentum. Soldiers fought harder when they believed purpose waited at the end. But there was no end. The Emperor never spoke of final victory. He never promised peace after conquest. His silence on the matter went largely unnoticed at first, buried beneath propaganda and ambition. Yet that silence shaped everything. Commanders learned to plan campaigns without expecting closure. Retreats were not failures. Stalemates were not mistakes. Everything continued. Vitiate watched the war the way one might watch a slow tide. Not for moments of drama, but for consistency. He understood that wars which burned too brightly consumed themselves. His war smoldered. It advanced, receded, and advanced again, never exhausting its fuel. From his perspective, so the Republic and the Empire were not enemies. They were opposing weights, keeping the galaxy in balance just long enough for his hunger to remain fed. If one side grew too strong, it threatened resolution. If one side weakened too much, it risked collapse. Neither outcome served him. So the war adjusted. Orders arrived that made little sense to those who received them. Fleets were redirected at the last moment. Reinforcements were delayed. Victories were left incomplete. Generals blamed logistics, politics, or incompetence. Few suspected intent, because intent required a visible hand. The Emperor's hand was never visible. In the Force, he remained far from the violence, not shielded, but separate. Jedi who searched for the source of the war's darkness found nothing they could confront. They sensed a will, vast and still, that did not move toward them, no matter how hard they reached. That unsettled them. War usually carried emotion. Rage, fear, desperation. This one felt hollow at its center, as if the conflict existed without a heart. Jedi felt the suffering, but could not trace it to a single source. The absence became its own kind of terror. Vitiate did not feel the deaths individually. He felt the continuation. Each battle extended the shape of the conflict a little further into the future. Each fallen world delayed finality. Each generation raised in war ensured the next would accept it as normal. This was not cruelty, it was efficiency. The Emperor did not need to be present because presence invited judgment. He ruled from beyond consequence, beyond risk, beyond the reach of any single outcome. No defeat touched him. No victory satisfied him. Yet the war belonged to the galaxy. The benefit belonged to him. And as long as the conflict never reached its true ruler, it could continue forever, slow, grinding, and endlessly useful. Lives moved through the war like credits through an account, counted, exchanged, and forgotten. Their value measured only by how long conflict could continue endlessly. Soldiers learned quickly that survival mattered less than availability because the Empire required bodies more than victories, and the Emperor required time above all else. Each deployment spent lives forward, not to win ground, but to slow collapse, ensuring wars remained unresolved, breathing, and useful to unseen design forever patiently. Commanders spoke of honor and sacrifice, but accounting ledgers quietly decided worth, tallying casualties as acceptable losses within continuing strategic necessity for imperial survival alone. Vitiate never ordered waste, yet waste defined everything, because prolonged war demanded constant expenditure of lives to maintain equilibrium between empires indefinitely, across generations, endlessly. Families learned to accept absence as normal, receiving notices without explanation. Understanding replacements would arrive, while meaning never did, again and again across the galaxy. The war economy thrived on this exchange, training, deploying, and replacing soldiers with efficiency that disguised tragedy beneath routine process of endless imperial conflict cycles. Republic citizens counted years by campaigns, measuring childhood and adulthood, by which front dominated news, and which names vanished quietly into memory without ceremony ever. Within the Force, suffering accumulated like pressure, spreading evenly, preventing release, ensuring no single scream outweighed another across countless lives, worlds, systems, eras, timelines, endlessly. Vitiate sensed this balance constantly, adjusting flow when loss threatened exhaustion, preserving enough hope to keep resistance alive, but never enough to end conflict permanently. Lives became units, not individuals, their passing registered as data rather than grief, which simplified command and conscience for imperial officers, generals, admirals, councils alike. This distance protected leaders from guilt, allowing decisions without memory, while the Emperor required neither protection nor forgetting, because hunger dissolved remorse into function alone. Vitiate measured war by sustainability, ensuring replacements outpaced losses, preventing sudden collapse that might starve him of continuity, duration, balance, patience, longevity, survival, endurance, time. No life was wasted from his view, because waste implied error, and this system functioned exactly as intended across centuries. Campaigns, sectors, fronts, wars, eternally. The galaxy paid the cost slowly, bleeding through generations, until sacrifice felt normal, and peace felt suspicious, distant, temporary, fragile, unsafe, impossible, unearned, feared, everywhere. Vitiate did not see faces, only continuity, a steady exchange, ensuring his existence remained unchallenged by final outcomes like victory, defeat, peace, resolution, closure, endings. Lives moved into war and vanished, replaced seamlessly, teaching the galaxy endurance through loss rather than change, growth, healing, recovery, hope, renewal, justice, meaning, purpose. For soldiers, death felt immediate. For the Emperor, it was distant, cumulative, useful, sustained, measured, controlled, distributed, balanced, normalized, harvested, recorded, absorbed, extended, eternal, hunger. This was how lives were spent, not with hatred, but with calculation, patience, and absolute indifference across endless battlefields, stars, systems, histories, timelines, wars, galaxies. The war continued because lives were available, and lives remained available because war never ended under imperial design. Silent orchestration, deliberate balance, patient hunger, rule. And Vitiate maintained this exchange without emotion, letting others mourn while he counted sustainability of suffering, survival, endurance, continuity, duration, consumption, existence, hunger, permanence, time itself. Thus lives became currency, endlessly circulated, never accumulating value beyond keeping the conflict alive across eras, systems, empires, generations, wars, fronts, sectors, galaxies, timelines, forever. The Emperor required no loyalty from the dead, only their contribution to continuation of war, tension, imbalance, uncertainty, fear, endurance, patience, hunger, survival, time itself. In this way, the long war fed him without touching him, distant, efficient, and inexhaustible across centuries. Conflicts, worlds, lives, sacrifices, losses, histories, galaxies, eternally. And so the galaxy paid, one life at a time, maintaining an emperor who never came close to battle, death, consequence, danger, loss, sacrifice, himself. Planets burned without ceremony, and no one remembered why. Worlds that once held names, histories, and quiet routines became coordinates on tactical displays. Fleets arrived, fought, withdrew, and left behind ash where cities had stood. Sometimes the Empire claimed these worlds, sometimes the Republic reclaimed them. Often, neither held them for long. The pattern repeated until ownership no longer mattered. For those living there, the war arrived suddenly and stayed just long enough to destroy everything that gave life shape. Then it moved on. Darth Vitiate never marked these worlds as victories or failures. They were not prizes. They were pressure points. Each burning planet released fear, grief, and displacement into the galaxy, a widening instability without tipping it into collapse. That balance was essential. Some planets were strategically valuable, others were not. Many burned simply because their survival threatened momentum. A stable world became a place where peace could take root. Peace slowed the war. Slowed war starved the system, so stability was removed. Populations fled into space, carrying stories of loss that spread faster than fleets ever could. Refugees reshaped nearby systems, overwhelming resources, destabilizing politics, igniting smaller conflicts that fed into the larger one. One burning planet created 5 more problems, and all of them served the same unseen design. The Sith commanders believed these actions brutal but necessary. The Republic believed them tragic but temporary. So neither understood that destruction without purpose was the purpose. In the Force, these planets left scars, not sharp wounds, but dull absences, places where voices ended abruptly and never returned. Jedi sensed these voids and struggled to explain them. There was no single moment of darkness to confront, only aftermath layered upon aftermath. Vitiate felt these deaths differently, not individually, but collectively. Each destroyed world stretched the conflict across more space, more time, more lives. The war became harder to end because it touched too many places to resolve cleanly. When one planet burned, others prepared. Fear spread outward, causing preemptive strikes, defensive build-ups, and desperate alliances. These reactions created new flashpoints, ensuring the war multiplied instead of concluding. From the Emperor's distant awareness, this was efficiency. He never issued orders to burn planets out of cruelty. Cruelty required emotion. This was logistics. A galaxy allowed to heal became dangerous. A galaxy kept wounded remained controllable. Some worlds burned twice, rebuilt just enough to matter, then destroyed again. Each time, hope weakened. Reconstruction slowed. People learned not to invest in futures that would be taken away. Survival replaced ambition. In these cycles, identity eroded. Cultures fragmented. History shortened. Memory focused on loss instead of continuity. This fragmentation ensured resistance never unified. Suffering remained personal, never collective enough to challenge the source. The Emperor remained far from these fires. He did not watch them burn. He did not need to. And their effect rippled outward, long after the flames died, shaping decisions made light years away by people who would never know his name. Planets burned for nothing because nothing was the point. No conquest required, no lesson taught, no warning delivered, only continuation. And as long as worlds could still be destroyed, the war could still move forward, carrying Darth Vitiate safely beyond reach, beyond consequence, beyond any end the galaxy might have hoped for. He never stood near the war he commanded. While fleets burned and worlds collapsed, Darth Vitiate remained distant, untouched by the violence that sustained him. He did not walk among soldiers or witness the destruction firsthand. Distance was not caution. It was separation. War was not something he participated in. It was something that happened around him. Those who served under his authority sometimes imagined him as a figure waiting behind the front lines, observing their struggles, judging their worth. They were wrong. The Emperor did not look toward the war at all. He looked past it. Conflict was not an experience to share. It was a condition to maintain. This distance shaped his rule. Generals made decisions believing they acted independently. Councils argued strategy without expecting guidance. Responsibility rested everywhere except at the center. When disasters occurred, blame scattered outward, never upward. Vitiate remained untouched by consequence. In the Force, his presence felt far away from battlefields, not shielded, but absent. Jedi who reached for him found a void where emotion should have been. No anger drove the war. No hatred fueled it. That absence confused them. Yet war without passion felt unnatural, wrong in ways they could not articulate. The Emperor allowed this misunderstanding to persist. A ruler who never came close could never be confronted. He could not be challenged because he was never present to oppose. Attempts to locate him failed, not because he hid, but because he did not exist where they searched. Even among the Sith, proximity was denied. Only a few ever stood before him, and fewer still understood what they encountered. He did not radiate menace. He did not threaten. He observed, and observation alone unraveled resolve. Those who left his presence carried a sense of distance that never faded. Vitiate did not need to inspire fear directly. Fear grew in the space between cause and effect. Soldiers died without seeing their ruler. Worlds burned without hearing his voice. And the absence of connection hollowed meaning from sacrifice. No martyrdom could form without a face to oppose. This detachment protected him from rebellion. One cannot overthrow what one cannot reach. Movements require symbols. Leaders require presence. Vitiate offered neither. His rule existed as structure, not personality. Over time, this distance reshaped loyalty. Service became procedural rather than emotional. Sith followed orders because systems demanded it, not because devotion compelled them. This suited the Emperor perfectly. Emotional loyalty burned out. Procedural obedience endured. The war never touched him, because it was never meant to. It existed to stretch the galaxy thin, to keep suffering distributed and unresolved. A ruler who shared in that suffering would weaken. Vitiate had removed himself from the cycle entirely. He did not rule through domination or inspiration. He ruled through insulation. Nothing reached him. No victory satisfied him. No loss diminished him. He existed beyond the outcomes others fought and died for. This was the final shape of his control. A ruler present everywhere in effect, and nowhere in form. A will that never came close, because closeness invited endings. As long as distance remained, the war could continue. And as long as the war continued, Darth Vitiate would endure, untouched, unseen, and perfectly beyond reach. The Emperor no longer needed a body to be heard. By the time the long war settled into routine, Darth Vitiate had learned that presence was a liability. A body could be tracked. A location could be attacked. A voice tied to flesh invited endings. So he removed himself from all of it, leaving behind only sound, instruction, and intent. Most of the Sith Empire never stood before him. They did not know where he resided, or even if he still existed in a single place. What they knew was the voice, calm, measured, empty of emotion. It arrived through intermediaries, through dark rituals, through servants who themselves had never seen his face. To hear the Emperor speak was rare. To understand him was rarer. When the voice came, it did not threaten. It did not inspire. It simply stated what would happen next, and outcomes were presented as inevitabilities rather than commands. Sith who received these messages felt no urge to disobey, not because of fear, but because resistance felt irrelevant. The voice carried no warmth, no anger, no satisfaction. It felt ancient and distant, as if it did not belong to the moment in which it spoke. Those who heard it described the same sensation afterward, a sense that they had not been addressed as individuals, but as functions. Vitiate understood the power of this separation. A ruler who appeared in person created bonds, even hostile ones. A ruler who existed only as a voice created distance that could not be crossed. His followers did not serve him out of devotion. They served because the system moved when the voice spoke. Over time, the Emperor reduced even that contact. Messages became less frequent, yet instructions more abstract. Entire campaigns were guided by a single phrase, interpreted and reinterpreted by those beneath him. He watched how meaning warped as it traveled downward, and he allowed it. Confusion exposed weakness. Adaptation revealed strength. Those who failed were not corrected. They were replaced. Some Sith attempted to draw closer, believing proximity would grant favor. They performed rituals, offered sacrifices, searched ancient texts for ways to summon the Emperor's presence. None succeeded. The voice never answered such attempts. Desire was not rewarded. Vitiate had learned long ago that loyalty built on closeness decayed. Loyalty built on distance endured. In the Force, his consciousness spread thin and wide, no longer anchored to a single vessel. He listened through others. He spoke through them. And bodies became instruments, not homes. When one failed, another was prepared. The voice continued, uninterrupted. This transformation isolated him completely. There were no conversations, no equals, no companions. Even the Sith Lords who believed themselves closest to him were addressing an echo, not the source. They served an idea shaped by his will, not the being itself. And Vitiate accepted this isolation without regret. Connection required vulnerability. Attachment required care. He had removed both from his existence. What remained was clarity and control, sustained by distance and silence. The Emperor did not need to be seen. He did not need to be followed. He only needed to be heard. And when his voice faded into silence once more, the galaxy continued to move exactly as he intended, guided by a presence that no longer required a body to rule. Masks were easier than bodies. Vitiate learned this as he multiplied himself across the Empire, shedding permanence in favor of utility and reach. No single form could contain him anymore, so he abandoned the idea of one. Instead, he wore others. Some were prepared vessels, shaped through ritual and obedience. Others were temporary hosts, touched briefly and left hollow when their purpose ended. Each mask allowed him to be present without being found. To his followers, these manifestations felt like revelations. A voice through a figure, a presence behind unfamiliar eyes. They believed they stood before the Emperor himself. They knelt. They pledged. They feared. And then the mask moved on, leaving them behind with the illusion of closeness. Vitiate never corrected the misunderstanding. Each mask served a function. One negotiated, another commanded, another punished. None endured. He learned which roles required warmth, which required cruelty, and which required nothing at all. Personality became tool. Identity became disposable. Those who interacted with these avatars sensed something wrong but could not name it. The being before them felt distant, unfocused, as if attention was divided elsewhere. Questions went unanswered. Reactions arrived late or not at all. The Emperor seemed present and absent at the same time. That absence was intentional. By fracturing his presence, Vitiate ensured no one ever knew which mask mattered. Rivals plotted against figures that could be discarded. Assassins struck at bodies that meant nothing. Rebellions formed around symbols already obsolete. Every effort wasted itself. Even the Sith closest to him never knew which version they served. They compared experiences and found contradictions. One described patience, another cruelty, another indifference. They argued over which was true, never realizing all were partial reflections of a will too large to be singular. In the Force, this fragmentation created confusion. Jedi attempting to track him felt trails that ended abruptly, leading to dead ends and false conclusions. They believed they had found him more than once, only to realize later they had touched a shadow already abandoned. Vitiate allowed these pursuits. They consumed time. They bred confidence. Each failure weakened resolve. For the Emperor, masks provided more than protection. They provided experimentation, and he observed how different faces altered obedience, how fear changed when delivered through kindness, how loyalty shifted when commands came from familiarity rather than distance. He learned that devotion was unreliable. Fear faded. Respect demanded maintenance. But uncertainty endured. So he embraced it fully. Masks within masks. Voices behind voices. Layers of separation that ensured no one ever stood close enough to understand him. His servants became instruments, not followers. They carried out will without knowing its source. And with every layer added, immortality grew lonelier. Vitiate accepted this cost without hesitation. Isolation was not loss. It was refinement. By removing himself from all genuine connection, he ensured nothing could reach him, no betrayal could land, no attachment could weaken him. The galaxy faced an emperor it could never truly meet, chasing faces that dissolved upon approach. And behind every mask, the same hunger waited, patient and untouched. They believed they had been selected. They were wrong. Those who served the emperor often spoke of destiny. They told themselves they had been chosen from countless others, elevated because of strength, loyalty, or insight. This belief sustained them through sacrifice. It gave meaning to obedience. Vitiate allowed it to exist because belief required less maintenance than truth. In reality, no one was chosen. Servants entered his orbit through convenience, not worth. They were positioned where they could be used, not where they belonged. Some were powerful Sith, others administrators, commanders, mystics, or voices in darkened chambers. Each believed proximity meant favor, so none understood they were interchangeable. The Emperor did not seek devotion. Devotion created expectations. Expectations led to disappointment. He preferred utility. A servant who fulfilled a role without question, required no reassurance, and left no emotional residue behind. When one failed, another replaced them. The system adjusted without pause. Vitiate never rewarded loyalty with closeness. Those who proved dependable were given distance. Those who sought recognition were allowed to burn themselves out trying to earn it. Ambition became its own filter, removing the unstable before they reached relevance. Many servants never heard his voice directly. They served layers beneath it. Orders passed through masks, through councils, through rituals stripped of personal connection. Responsibility blurred as it moved downward, and leaving no one certain where the will originated. This confusion protected the center. Some servants suspected the truth. They sensed that they were tools, not partners. But even that realization changed nothing. Awareness did not grant escape. To leave meant irrelevance. To stay meant service. Most chose service, because at least it gave shape to existence. The Emperor understood this choice well. He had built a structure where obedience felt safer than freedom. Servants followed orders, not because they feared punishment, but because purpose without direction felt unbearable. He offered a direction, not meaning. Those closest to him experienced the greatest isolation. They stood at the edge of his presence and felt how little of them remained visible. Conversations were brief, praise non-existent, correction rare. They were not guided, and they were allowed. Some mistook this silence for trust, others for indifference. Both interpretations served him equally. In the Force, these servants appeared dim, their identities worn thin by constant use. Vitiate did not drain them intentionally. He simply did not replenish what was spent. They aged, weakened, or broke, and when they did, they were removed quietly. No mourning followed. The Emperor never remembered their names. Names were unnecessary. Functions mattered. Once a function ended, so did relevance. He did not hate them. Hatred implied attachment. He did not value them either. Value implied loss. They existed to carry will forward and absorb consequence backward. Between those 2 points, they were invisible. This was the truth none of them wanted to accept. They were not part of his vision, and they were part of its machinery, and machinery was never chosen. It was assembled. In this way, Darth Vitiate surrounded himself with servants who believed they mattered, while remaining entirely alone, untouched by loyalty, betrayal, or grief. control replaced connection completely, and the Empire continued to function without ever realizing how empty its center had become. Immortality did not make him vast. It made him alone. As centuries passed, Darth Vitiate discovered that endless existence stripped away more than it preserved. Bodies could be replaced, voices could be renewed, empires could be reshaped, but connection, once severed, did not return. Time widened the distance between him and every other living thing, until no bridge remained. He no longer experienced companionship. Others aged, weakened, and died while he remained unchanged. Even Sith Lords who believed themselves ancient were brief flickers beside him. Their ambitions felt rushed, their fears repetitive, their betrayals predictable. Nothing about them could last long enough to matter. Vitiate stopped seeing individuals. He saw patterns. The galaxy became a system of motion and decay, cycling endlessly while he stood outside its rhythm. He remembered what it meant to be a child once, to feel hunger that ended, pain that passed, fear that burned out. Those experiences no longer applied. They belonged to a shorter life. Now, everything around him was temporary. This was the cost of permanence. Immortality removed urgency, and with it, meaning. Moments blurred together. Conflicts repeated with different names. Empires rose and fell without surprise. The Emperor no longer anticipated outcomes. He waited for them. In the Force, his presence felt distant even to himself. He existed across time rather than within it, observing the galaxy as one might observe weather. Storms came and went. Destruction followed familiar paths. Nothing required intervention unless it threatened continuity. Even hunger changed. It was no longer sharp or demanding. It was steady, background, a function that required maintenance rather than satisfaction. Worlds, lives, wars, these were not desired. They were necessary, and necessity did not bring comfort. Vitiate understood that immortality had removed his ability to relate. Mortals feared death. He did not. They sought legacy. He had outlasted every legacy he had witnessed. They craved meaning in action. He saw only repetition. So this separation deepened his isolation. He could not explain himself to others because explanation required shared experience. He could not be understood because understanding required limits. He had none, so he stopped trying. The Emperor withdrew further, not from strategy, but from presence. He reduced contact to necessity. He spoke less. He observed more. Silence became his natural state, not as tactic, but as condition. There were moments, rare and fleeting, when he sensed the echo of what he had lost. Not regret. Regret implied desire to change. This was awareness, a quiet recognition that eternity came at the cost of belonging. But even that awareness faded with time. Immortality demanded distance. Attachment risked vulnerability. Connection invited loss. Vitiate had learned these lessons too well to forget them now. He did not mourn what he no longer felt. He simply adjusted. In the end, the Emperor was not surrounded by followers, servants, or allies. He was surrounded by systems that functioned without him being present. That was his greatest achievement and his deepest isolation. He had removed himself from death. He had removed himself from life. And in that silent space between existence and absence, Darth Vitiate endured, unchallenged, eternal, and utterly alone. Zeost was not chosen because it was weak. It was chosen because it was alive. For centuries, the world had stood as a symbol of Sith endurance. Once broken by ancient wars, It had been rebuilt layer by layer, scar over scar, until suffering itself became part of its identity. The Sith Empire did not hide its darkness there. It displayed it openly, confident that nothing could truly threaten a world so deeply aligned with shadow. That confidence was the reason Zeost was marked. Darth Vitiate did not announce his intent. He never did. The decision formed quietly, long before fleets moved or rituals began. Zeost was stable, too stable. Its people endured war without collapse. Its systems functioned. Its fear had learned to live alongside routine. That kind of endurance was dangerous. Shared endurance led to normalization. Normalization weakened hunger, so the Emperor turned his attention toward it. At first, nothing changed. Trade routes remained open. Temples still echoed with chants. Sith Lords continued their rivalries beneath a sky that had seen worse and survived. Even the Force felt familiar there, heavy but present, responsive in its usual corrupted way. No warning came. That was the first death. Vitiate began by touching the planet lightly. Not draining, not consuming. Just listening. He extended his awareness across the surface, feeling billions of lives moving together in uneasy harmony. Fear existed there, but it was contained, organized, predictable. That would not do. He whispered instead of commanded. Across Zeost, people began to feel watched. Not by authorities, not by enemies, by something deeper, and a sense that the world itself was listening back. Sleep became difficult. Meditation fractured. Sith rituals lost focus. Jedi prisoners held in secret felt something vast stir beyond their reach. Still, no one fled. The Emperor allowed the unease to grow slowly. Panic burned too fast. He needed dread to settle in, to mature. Streets grew quieter, voices lowered. Even the Sith spoke less openly, uncertain why confidence felt thinner with each passing cycle. Then the Force began to weaken, not vanish. Dull. Sith Lords found their abilities lagging. Meditation brought silence instead of power. Rage sparked and faded without result. They blamed exhaustion, distraction, one another. None considered the truth, because the truth required imagining something greater than the Sith themselves. Vitiate remained distant, letting the planet come apart internally before he touched it fully. He understood that destruction meant more when hope still believed in survival. Zeost had survived too much already. It needed to believe it could survive this too. The population felt it next. Animals grew restless. Technology faltered without explanation. Communications lagged. Hospitals filled with those who claimed to feel empty, as if something essential had been removed while they still breathed. Physicians found no cause. Sith enforcers found no enemy. The Force was being thinned. This was the second death beginning to form. Zeost had already died once in ancient wars. Its scars proved that. But this death was different. It was not violent yet. It was quiet, surgical, a removal rather than a strike. The Emperor was not killing the planet. He was unmaking its connection to existence itself. By the time the Sith leadership realized something was wrong, it was too late to stop. Rituals designed to amplify power instead bled it away faster. Attempts to reach the Emperor went unanswered. Masks remained silent. The voice did not come. Vitiate had chosen Zeost not to punish it, but to demonstrate something the galaxy still refused to accept. Immortality did not make him ruler of the Sith. It made him predator of worlds. As the Force on Zeost weakened further, the Emperor prepared the final step. Not an attack, not a conquest, a revelation. Ziost would not fall screaming. It would fall empty. And when it was done, the galaxy would understand what kind of god now watched it from the dark. The moment came without warning. There was no ritual circle, no gathering of Sith, and no final chant echoing through temples. Ziost did not receive the mercy of anticipation. 1 second, the Force still breathed through the planet. The next, it screamed. Every sensitive mind felt it at once. Sith Lords dropped to their knees as the dark side recoiled from them, tearing inward instead of answering. Years of discipline shattered in an instant. Power they had relied on since childhood simply vanished, leaving behind only the memory of what it used to feel like. Rage rose, but it found nothing to cling to. Fear followed, and even that felt thin. Across the planet, civilians froze mid-step. Pilots lost control of ships still docked in atmosphere. Engineers stared at consoles they suddenly could not focus on. Children cried without knowing why. It was not pain that struck them. It was absence. A sudden, violent awareness that something fundamental had been pulled away. In hidden cells and forgotten chambers, Jedi prisoners felt it more clearly than anyone. For a brief moment, they believed death had come, not because they felt attacked, but because the Force itself seemed to recoil in agony, as if reality had been wounded. This was not darkness rising. This was life being removed. The scream was not sound. It was pressure. A wave that passed through every living thing simultaneously, collapsing connection, stripping away depth, leaving minds exposed and fragile. The Force did not flow. It convulsed, then began to drain. Sith rituals failed instantly. Circles collapsed. Ancient safeguards shattered like glass. The more the Sith reached for power, the faster it slipped through their grasp. Some screamed, others went silent. Just a few laughed in disbelief, unable to process what was happening. The planet itself began to change. The sky dimmed, not with clouds, but with hollowness. Colors lost sharpness. Wind died without warning. Animals fell still where they stood, not dead, but disconnected, as if instinct itself had been severed. Vitiate did not appear. He did not need to. From far beyond the planet, his will closed like a fist, not crushing, sealing. The Force was not being consumed violently. It was being drawn inward with terrifying efficiency, siphoned away faster than thought could follow. For the Sith, this was blasphemy. The dark side was supposed to answer them. It was supposed to grow stronger in suffering. Instead, suffering now fed something else entirely. They were no longer wielders of power. They were conduits being emptied. Some tried to flee. Starships lifted from Ziost's surface only to drift, systems failing as crews lost focus, coordination, will. Hyperdrives misfired. Navigation collapsed. The Force, which guided instinct and perception, had thinned too much to rely on. The scream spread beyond the planet. Force users light years away paused mid-meditation, gasping as if struck. Masters felt something vast and wrong pass through the galaxy, like a shadow cast by something unimaginably large. No vision accompanied it. No name. Just certainty that a line had been crossed. On Ziost, the drain accelerated. People began to collapse, not screaming, not fighting, simply falling where they stood as the connection sustaining consciousness unraveled. Hospitals filled and then went quiet. Streets emptied. Towers stood untouched, filled with silence instead of life. Yet the Force did not die. It fled. What remained on Ziost was a wound so deep it swallowed sound, motion, and meaning. The scream ended as abruptly as it began, leaving behind a stillness that felt heavier than any explosion. Only then did the truth become clear. This was not an attack meant to conquer. It was a demonstration. The Emperor had shown the galaxy what happened when a world stopped existing in the Force, and the scream echoed long after there were no voices left to hear it. Silence followed, and it did not lift. When the scream ended, Zeost did not collapse into chaos. It emptied. Streets that had once carried crowds now held nothing but drifting ash and stalled air. Lights remained on in towers where no one stood beneath them. Doors stayed open where people had fallen, trying to escape. The planet did not look destroyed, and it looked abandoned by existence itself. Billions were gone, not dead in the way war made death familiar. There were no wounds to mourn, no ruins to count. Bodies lay where life had stopped mid-motion, eyes open, expressions unfinished. Whatever had sustained them had been removed too completely for fear or pain to follow. The Sith were among the last to fall. Some clung to rage even as the Force slipped away, screaming defiance into emptiness. Others collapsed quietly, unable to comprehend a universe where the dark side no longer answered them. Their temples, once thick with power, became hollow stone shells echoing with nothing. On Zeost, death did not arrive as an enemy. It arrived as departure. Across the galaxy, the shock moved outward like ripples from a stone dropped into deep water. Force users staggered as if struck, clutching at presences that had vanished without transition. Entire constellations of life winked out of awareness in a single instant. Jedi Masters halted mid-sentence, sensing the absence before understanding it. Something vast had been there, something alive, and now it was not. The Force did not whisper of death. It whispered of removal. For ordinary beings, the loss was slower to register. Reports arrived fractured and confused. Communications from Zeost cut off mid-signal. Scout ships sent to investigate returned in silence, crews shaken, unable to explain what they had seen. A world full of bodies, a force that would not answer, a stillness that resisted description. No plague spread, no radiation lingered. Sensors found no single cause. Every explanation failed because the event had not followed rules of destruction, and it had followed rules of consumption. Zeost had not been destroyed twice. It had been erased twice. The first death had scarred it. This one removed it from the living galaxy entirely. Vitiate did not appear to claim victory. There was nothing left to rule there. Zeost had served its purpose. It had become proof. The Emperor had not simply killed a planet. He had demonstrated that life itself could be withdrawn, that existence depended on permission he now controlled. This was not conquest. It was disclosure. Fear spread faster than any fleet. Worlds that had never seen Sith banners began to panic. Governments sealed borders. Jedi councils convened in secrecy. Sith Lords elsewhere grew quiet, suddenly aware that allegiance offered no protection from a fate that did not discriminate. Billions had vanished, and there was no one left to blame directly. That uncertainty was the final cruelty. The galaxy could not rally against a disaster with no face. It could not mourn properly, because mourning required meaning. Zeost's silence offered none. It was simply absence, permanent and complete. For the first time in generations, the galaxy understood something it had always refused to believe. There was a god among them, and it fed on existence. Zeost stood as a reminder no one could approach. A dead world that did not decay, because decay required life to move forward. It would remain exactly as it was, a frozen echo of a moment when billions simply stopped being. And in that silence, the Emperor's shadow grew deeper, because nothing terrified the galaxy more than realizing how easily everything it was could be taken away. The galaxy did not see him appear. It understood him by what was missing. After Ziost fell silent, no declaration followed. No voice spoke from the dark. No Sith banners were raised over the dead world. Darth Vitiate did not claim the moment, because claiming required presence, and presence was unnecessary now. The absence itself was enough. Ziost remained untouched. Fleets that approached it slowed instinctively, crews uneasy before instruments registered danger. The force around the planet felt wrong, like a scar that refused to heal. Jedi could not meditate near it. Sith could not draw strength from it. It was not dark. It was empty. That emptiness spoke louder than any proclamation. Across the galaxy, leaders struggled to respond. There was no enemy formation to strike, no system to blockade, no weapon to dismantle. So what had happened on Ziost did not resemble war, terrorism, or natural disaster. It resembled subtraction, and subtraction could not be fought. For the first time, even the Sith questioned their place. They had believed themselves masters of the dark side, heirs to ancient power. Ziost proved they were not even participants. They were subjects living within a system they did not control. The Emperor they served was no longer merely ruler or strategist. He was something else entirely. Not a tyrant, not a conqueror, a condition. The Jedi understood this faster than most. In the Force, they sensed a presence that did not advance or retreat. It simply existed, vast and patient, like a horizon that could never be reached. This was not an enemy who sought conflict. It was a being for whom conflict was incidental. The realization broke something inside them. If such a being existed, then balance was fragile beyond repair. The Force could be wounded in ways no teaching had prepared them for. Ziost was not a warning of what might happen. It was proof of what already could. Darth Vitiate had revealed himself without revealing his form. He did not stand before the galaxy as a god demanding worship. He revealed godhood by demonstrating scale, by showing that entire worlds could be removed without effort, without anger, without consequence. The galaxy was not beneath him because he ruled it. It was beneath him because it fed him. Fear changed shape after Ziost. Before, it had been personal. Fear of invasion, fear of loss, fear of defeat. Now it became existential. Fear of erasure, fear that nothing was guaranteed to persist, that no fortress, no order, and no belief could protect against a will that did not need to act directly. People began to live differently. Governments delayed decisions, fearing attention. Sith Lords avoided ambition, fearing notice. Jedi hesitated to reach outward, afraid of touching something that would notice them in return. Silence spread not because it was ordered, but because it felt safer. This was Vitiate's true revelation. Not that he could destroy worlds, but that he did not need to. Ziost stood untouched, a monument made of nothing, its cities frozen mid-existence. It did not decay. It did not change. It waited, empty and permanent, reminding the galaxy of what absence looked like when it was intentional. The Emperor did not return there. He did not need to. The lesson would not fade. From that moment on, the galaxy lived under a new understanding. And it was no longer the stage of great wars and heroic destinies. It was a resource, a reservoir of life and fear and time, observed by something that did not share its limits. Darth Vitiate did not announce himself as a god. He let the galaxy arrive at that conclusion alone. And in doing so, He ensured something far more powerful than obedience. He ensured restraint, because once a god is revealed through absence, every action feels like risk, and every future feels uncertain. Ziost had died twice, and in its second death, it taught the galaxy the most terrifying truth it would ever learn. Existence itself could be withdrawn. The will that had once been singular began to echo. Darth Vitiate had stretched himself across time, bodies, and distance for so long that division no longer felt dangerous. It felt efficient. One consciousness could observe war, while another shaped politics. One presence could sleep, while another fed. Fragmentation was not weakness at first. It was refinement. But division always carries a cost. What began as separation of function slowly became separation of awareness. Each vessel carried the same hunger, the same intent, the same memory of Nathema and Ziost. Yet each experienced the galaxy from a different angle. Over time, those angles hardened into perspectives. Perspectives became preferences. Preferences became assumptions. And assumptions drifted. Vitiate did not notice the change immediately, and immortality dulled urgency. Centuries passed without consequence, reinforcing the belief that his will remained perfectly aligned across every form. He had never doubted himself before. Doubt was a luxury of finite minds. Yet signs appeared. Orders contradicted one another. Subtle at first. A campaign encouraged by one voice was quietly undermined by another. A servant elevated in one place was ignored in another. The system absorbed these inconsistencies, but strain began to show. Each fragment believed it was the center. This was the danger of immortality divided. Every piece carried the full weight of memory, but none carried the full context of the others. Communication between fragments was instinctive, not constant. They felt one another, but they did not always listen. The galaxy did not see this fracture, it felt it. The Emperor's presence in the Force no longer felt perfectly still. It shifted, not wildly, but unevenly, like a massive structure settling under its own weight. Jedi sensed moments of hesitation where none had existed before. Sith felt windows of opportunity open and close without explanation. Vitiate's hunger remained unchanged. That was the problem. Each fragment fed as if it alone sustained the whole. Each reached outward, drawing life, fear, and conflict to itself. The consumption overlapped. Pressure increased. What had once been a controlled flow became competition without intention. The Emperor had never competed with himself before. Within his consciousness, echoes formed. Thoughts repeated. Decisions justified twice. Certainty required reinforcement. These were not cracks yet. They were stresses, invisible but accumulating. Some fragments grew more aggressive, others more patient. One favored distance, another favored presence. None believed themselves incomplete, because each remembered being whole. That memory was enough to convince them. Immortality had preserved him too well. It had allowed every version of himself to persist instead of resolving into one. Vitiate did not panic. Panic was still beyond him. But awareness crept in. A recognition that something had shifted. That control now required effort where once it required none. For the first time since Nathema, he adjusted rather than simply observed. Fragments were reined in, some silenced, others isolated. He attempted to reassert singular will, to collapse perspective back into unity. The effort worked, but not cleanly. Resistance emerged from within, subtle and instinctive. The will resisted itself. This was not rebellion, It was divergence. Immortality had allowed him to outlast everything else, but it had also removed the pressure that forced resolution. Mortals changed because they had to. He had not. Now, change was happening anyway. The Emperor remained vast, powerful, and feared. To the galaxy, nothing had weakened. But beneath that surface, the first true instability had formed. Not from enemies, not from heroes. From the simple fact that a mind stretched too far eventually loses its center. One will, many voices. And for the first time, they were not perfectly in agreement. Each fragment carried the certainty of wholeness. When Darth Vitiate divided himself, he did not create copies that understood they were partial. Each vessel awakened with full memory, full hunger, and in full conviction that it was the true continuation of the Emperor's will. None perceived itself as lesser. None sensed incompleteness. To each fragment, the others felt distant, like echoes rather than equals. This belief shaped everything. Every fragment remembered Nathema. Each recalled the ritual, the silence, the moment life itself bent inward. Zeus lived in all of them as proof of godhood. Those memories anchored identity. If they remembered the same origin, then they reasoned they must be the same being. But memory alone does not ensure unity. Each fragment experienced time differently. One lingered among Sith politics, navigating ambition and decay. Another drifted through war, absorbing conflict and fear. Another withdrew almost entirely, feeding slowly and watching patterns unfold. These experiences shaped interpretation, and an interpretation shaped intention. The fragments no longer agreed on what mattered most. One believed patience remained supreme. Delay preserved control. Another sensed urgency, interpreting instability as threat. It reached outward more aggressively, feeding faster, exerting pressure where restraint once ruled. A third viewed both as inefficient, favoring direct influence and presence. None questioned their authority. Because each fragment felt whole, none yielded easily. When instincts conflicted, they rationalized. When outcomes diverged, they justified. The will did not fracture loudly. It rationalized itself into contradiction. The galaxy felt the result before the Emperor did. Imperial structures received overlapping guidance. Subtle shifts in emphasis created confusion. Orders felt aligned in tone, but misaligned in execution. The Empire did not collapse, but it strained. Servants hesitated, unsure which signals mattered most. Sith Lords exploited gaps, sensing opportunity without understanding cause. Within the Force, the Emperor's presence no longer felt singular. It pulsed unevenly, expanding in one region while receding in another. Jedi sensed this inconsistency as weakness, though they could not locate its source. Sith sensed it as possibility, mistaking fracture for invitation. The fragments did not communicate in words. They shared instinct, pressure, impulse. When one fed heavily, others felt resistance. When one withdrew, another expanded to compensate. Balance emerged through reaction rather than intent. This was new. Vitiate had always controlled balance deliberately. Now balance emerged from tension between selves. And he did not recognize it as loss of control, only as complexity. Immortality encouraged patience. He allowed divergence to continue, believing it would resolve naturally. It did not. Each fragment began reinforcing its own perspective. Decisions aligned more closely with local experience than collective vision. None saw themselves as fragment. Each saw the others as distortions, echoes that needed correction. Correction took subtle forms. Influence was redirected. Resources shifted. Attention narrowed. Each fragment attempted to steer the whole by asserting its interpretation of necessity. None succeeded fully. Each believed resistance came from external interference, not internal disagreement. The hunger intensified. Feeding overlapped. Pressure increased. The Emperor's presence grew heavier, less precise. So where once consumption was measured, it now spiked and receded unpredictably. Worlds felt sudden surges of dread followed by strange lulls. The pattern lost elegance. This was the unseen cost of fractured immortality. A being meant to be singular cannot remain so when spread without reconciliation. Mortals change because time forces choice. Vitiate had avoided choice by becoming many. Now those choices emerged anyway, uncoordinated and competing. Still, he did not feel fear. Fear required perspective. He remained too vast to feel threatened by himself. But for the first time, certainty required reinforcement. Decisions lingered longer. Silence became heavier. Each fragment believed it was whole. That belief was the fracture, and as long as none accepted division, unity could not return. The Emperor continued, powerful and eternal, but no longer perfectly aligned with himself. The hunger had always pointed outward. Now it began to fold back on itself. For most of his existence, Darth Vitiate's need had been simple in direction, if not in scale. Life existed beyond him. Fear, conflict, and existence itself flowed toward him, sustaining what death no longer could touch. Hunger was a pull, not a push. It reached outward and drew the galaxy closer. Fragmentation changed that. Each fragment fed as if it alone carried the burden of eternity. Each reached for sustenance with the same instinct, unaware that others were doing the same. Where once consumption was measured and deliberate, it became redundant. Pressure built not against the galaxy, but within the Emperor's divided will. The hunger no longer spread evenly. It pooled. Fragments began to sense resistance where there should have been none. Feeding felt slower in some places, sharper in others. The Emperor adjusted instinctively, but the adjustments conflicted. One fragment compensated for another without knowing why. The system grew inefficient. This inefficiency produced a new sensation: strain. Vitiate had never felt strain before. Hunger had always been satisfied by expansion. Now, expansion met itself. The more he consumed, the more resistance he felt, as if the galaxy pushed back not from without, but from within his own presence. The fragments interpreted this differently. One believed the galaxy was thinning, requiring more aggressive feeding. Another sensed imbalance and withdrew, attempting to restore equilibrium. A third blamed external forces, unseen enemies, interfering with the natural flow. And each responded according to its perspective, amplifying contradiction. The hunger intensified. Instead of drawing energy cleanly, it began to distort intention. Consumption lost precision. It no longer targeted only what was useful. It reached indiscriminately, pulling at places that offered little sustenance while ignoring others that once fed him well. This was subtle. The galaxy did not notice immediately. But in the Force, the Emperor's presence felt heavier, less refined. Where once his shadow was vast but still, now it churned faintly, like deep water stirred by conflicting currents. Jedi sensed unease they could not explain. Sith sensed opportunity where none should exist. The hunger had begun to look inward for resolution. Fragments grew more aware of one another, not as partners, but as obstacles. When one fed, and another felt diminished. When one withdrew, another surged forward. This created a cycle of reaction that never settled. The Emperor no longer consumed as a unified will. For the first time, hunger competed with itself. This competition did not resemble conflict. There was no argument, no conscious rebellion. It was instinctive, like organs straining for resources within the same body. The Emperor remained whole in memory, but divided in function. Vitiate did not recognize this as decay. He recognized it as pressure requiring management. He tightened control. Fragments were restricted. Feeding was limited in some regions, increased in others. He attempted to re-establish hierarchy within himself, but hierarchy required acceptance. Each fragment still believed it was the center. Restriction felt like interference, not coordination. And the hunger responded by turning sharper. It no longer sought merely to sustain existence. It sought certainty. It reached inward, reinforcing identity, clinging to memory, defending perspective. Hunger became not just need, but justification. This was the danger. A hunger that feeds on existence can be satisfied. A hunger that feeds on identity cannot. Vitiate's immortality had removed the fear of ending. Now it threatened the fear of dissolution. The fragments did not fear death. They feared being overridden by one another. Hunger became a means of asserting primacy. The galaxy felt the effect as instability. Sudden surges of darkness appeared and vanished. Worlds experienced inexplicable dread followed by calm. Long-standing patterns disrupted. Balance wavered. Not enough to reveal weakness, but enough to suggest it. The Emperor remained powerful, vast, eternal. But his hunger, once a tool, had become a pressure point. It no longer flowed cleanly outward. It circled. And as it did, the first true erosion began, not of power, but of control. Immortality did not fail all at once. It fractured quietly. Darth Vitiate had always believed eternity was static. Once achieved, it would remain unchanged, immune to erosion. Time could not wear it down. Death could not touch it. What he had not considered was that immortality, like any structure, depended on cohesion. That cohesion was slipping. The fragments no longer aligned instinctively. Where once divergence corrected itself, now it persisted. Each fragment adapted independently, developing habits, priorities, and rhythms that no longer merged cleanly. The Emperor remained vast, but the vastness lacked a single center. This was not weakness in power. It was weakness in direction. Vitiate sensed it in the way decisions lingered. Where certainty once arrived fully formed, now it required confirmation. Silence, once effortless, became deliberate. He paused, not because he needed time, but because agreement no longer came automatically. The galaxy felt these pauses. Responses arrived late. Pressure lifted where it once remained constant. Systems that had long existed under a steady shadow felt fluctuations. Jedi sensed moments where the darkness thinned, then returned heavier than before. Sith sensed gaps, fleeting but real. Immortality was no longer seamless. The Emperor attempted consolidation. Fragments were drawn closer, their influence narrowed, their independence restricted. He did not frame this as correction, but as refinement. Yet refinement required cooperation, and cooperation required recognition of division. That recognition never fully came. Each fragment resisted in subtle ways. Feeding patterns shifted. Awareness dulled or sharpened selectively. What should have merged instead overlapped imperfectly, creating distortion rather than unity. The Emperor felt himself everywhere, yet nowhere fully present. This was the paradox of his existence. He had become too large to reconcile himself. The more he attempted control, the more effort it required. Effort had never been part of immortality before. Effort implied limitation. The realization did not frighten him, but it unsettled something long dormant. For the first time since Nathema, endurance required maintenance. The galaxy did not see collapse. It saw inconsistency. An emperor who remained distant but no longer absolute. A shadow that shifted slightly from moment to moment. Nothing enough to inspire rebellion, but enough to erode inevitability. And inevitability had always been his greatest weapon. Vitiate understood that immortality had preserved him beyond change, but fragmentation had reintroduced it. Change no longer came from outside threats. It came from within, unavoidable and ungoverned. He could not destroy the fragments without diminishing himself. He could not ignore them without losing coherence. Every option carried cost, something immortality had once removed from his existence entirely. This was the beginning of limitation. Not death, not defeat, but constraint. The Emperor remained ancient, powerful, and feared. Yet something essential had shifted. Eternity was no longer smooth. It had edges now, points of tension where will bent instead of flowing. Immortality was still intact, but it was no longer perfect, and perfection had been the foundation of his rule. As the fractures settled into permanence, the Emperor adapted, as he always had. But adaptation was change, and change meant the end of absolute stasis. From this point forward, his existence would require balance rather than certainty. The galaxy had not wounded him. Heroes had not challenged him. The Force itself had not undone him. Immortality had simply gone on too long. And in that slow realization, the Sith Emperor crossed a threshold he could never return from. He was still eternal, but eternity was no longer effortless. It was beginning to break. The hunger did not vanish suddenly. It weakened. For centuries, Darth Vitiate had defined himself by consumption. Worlds, wars, fear, and life itself had flowed toward him, sustaining what death could not claim. Hunger was not a flaw in his existence. It was its engine. As long as it fed, he endured. But by the end, feeding no longer came easily. The fractures within his immortality had changed the rhythm of consumption. Where once hunger drew cleanly from the galaxy, now it met resistance. Not resistance from enemies or armies, but from the limits of his own divided will. The flow slowed. The pull weakened. What had once been effortless became strained. Vitiate sensed this first as delay. Moments passed where sustenance should have arrived, but did not. Fear still existed, conflict still burned, and life still struggled and suffered. Yet the transfer no longer felt complete. Something was interrupting the process, dispersing what once reached him whole. This was unfamiliar. The Emperor did not believe himself defeated. Defeat implied opposition. What he faced was obstruction. The galaxy was no longer yielding to him in the same way. Resistance had taken a new form, one he had not anticipated. Across the Force, currents shifted. Beings who would once have collapsed under his shadow endured longer than expected. Worlds that should have broken resisted decay, not through strength but through persistence. Survival itself became quieter, more stubborn, less dramatic. The galaxy was no longer offering itself willingly. Vitiate adapted, as he always had. He reached further, extending his presence to compensate for loss of efficiency. He focused hunger more sharply, attempting to isolate sources of sustenance that still responded. But fragmentation interfered. Effort overlapped. Consumption competed with itself. Instead of amplifying power, expansion diluted it. For the first time, hunger encountered diminishing returns. This was not starvation, it was insufficiency. The Emperor understood then that something fundamental had changed. The galaxy had not grown stronger. He had grown less cohesive. Hunger required unity of will to function perfectly. Division turned appetite into noise. The realization did not anger him. Anger had long since lost relevance. It unsettled him. If hunger could weaken, then immortality was not absolute. It was conditional, sustained by alignment, precision, and coherence. All three had been compromised by his own evolution. Vitiate attempted consolidation again. Fragments were drawn inward, forced closer together. He tried to reassert singularity, to compress eternity back into one voice. The effort succeeded partially. Pressure intensified, presence sharpened. But the hunger did not recover its former clarity. It fed, but unevenly. The galaxy felt this shift as relief without triumph. There was no great victory, no moment of collapse, just a gradual easing of pressure, as if a storm had begun to pass without ever breaking fully. Jedi sensed the change but did not celebrate. Sith felt it and did not understand it. The Emperor's shadow remained vast, but its edge dulled. His inevitability no longer felt complete. This was the truth Vitiate finally confronted. He could still exist, but he could no longer consume without limit. And the hunger that had defined him since Nathema was still present, but it was constrained, not by force, not by heroes, by the consequences of immortality stretched too far, divided too deeply, sustained too long. Vitiate did not die in this moment. He did not fall. He endured. But endurance was no longer expansion. It was maintenance, survival rather than dominance. The hunger that had once shaped the galaxy now struggled simply to persist within it. And in that quiet limitation, the Sith Emperor crossed the final threshold of his existence. He was still eternal, but he could no longer feed as he once had. Resistance did not rise like rebellion. It endured like refusal. The galaxy did not unite to defeat Darth Vitiate. There was no final alliance, no single stand, no moment where power met power and decided the outcome. And what opposed him, in the end, was quieter and far less dramatic. It was the simple act of not yielding completely. Worlds continued to suffer, but they did not collapse as easily as before. Populations adapted without surrendering their existence. Fear remained, yet it no longer flowed cleanly toward a single center. It scattered, diluted by countless small acts of survival that refused to become despair. This was not victory, it was friction. Vitiate had always understood resistance as something to be crushed or consumed. Jedi resistance had been hunted. Sith resistance had been absorbed. Military resistance had been redirected. But this was different. The galaxy was not fighting him. It was persisting beside him. Individuals lived without meaning and still lived. Systems failed and were rebuilt imperfectly. So wars ended without resolution and did not immediately begin again. These were small things. Together, they mattered. The Force reflected this change, not as light overcoming darkness, but as noise interfering with clarity. The currents that once carried fear and conflict toward the Emperor now dispersed unpredictably. Energy did not gather. It blared outward, lost among countless lives that continued without purpose. Vitiate sensed this and reached again. He pressed where resistance seemed weakest. He leaned into conflict, encouraged instability, reopened wounds he had once used to feed. But the response was uneven. Some places broke, others endured. The pattern no longer obeyed him. This was resistance without triumph. No one celebrated survival. No one believed the threat was over. The galaxy did not feel saved. It felt exhausted. That exhaustion mattered more than hope ever could. The Emperor understood the implication. A galaxy that expects salvation will offer itself to a savior or a tyrant. A galaxy that expects nothing simply survives. Survival did not empower him. It denied him focus. He could still consume, but not completely. Every act of feeding met inertia, not defiance, delay. Life did not rush toward him anymore. It lingered, scattered, unwilling to become fuel in a single direction. This was not the work of heroes. Heroes had risen and fallen many times during his reign. They had changed nothing in the long term. What changed now was scale. Resistance existed everywhere and nowhere, too small to destroy, too widespread to overcome. Vitiate did not face an enemy. He faced endurance. That endurance could not defeat him, but it could deny him fulfillment. Hunger persisted, but satisfaction did not follow. Every gain felt partial. Every expansion thinned itself. Power remained, but certainty did not. The galaxy survived, not because it overcame him, but because it learned to exist under his shadow without offering itself entirely. That lesson did not come from wisdom or courage. It came from fatigue. And fatigue was something even an immortal could not erase. The Emperor adapted again, because adaptation was all that remained. He withdrew pressure where resistance hardened. He focused where it weakened. He managed decline rather than reversing it. This was not the end of his influence. It was the end of his inevitability. Resistance without victory reshaped the outcome. There was no final moment to remember, no collapse to record, but only a gradual understanding that the hunger no longer ruled everything it touched. Vitiate endured this as he endured all things. But endurance without dominance was not what he had built eternity to achieve. And in that quiet realization, the galaxy crossed a boundary it would never name. It learned that survival alone was enough. Silence did not arrive as peace. It arrived as absence. When the pressure finally eased, the galaxy did not cheer. There was no shared moment of relief, no signal that something terrible had ended. The shadow that had loomed for centuries simply stopped tightening. It remained present, but no longer advancing. The change was subtle enough that many never noticed it at all. Life continued. Worlds rebuilt without believing they were safe. Governments functioned without trusting the future. Jedi meditated and felt something vast still watching, but no longer pressing inward. Sith plotted and sensed power remained, yet it no longer answered with the same certainty. The silence felt incomplete. This was not the quiet of victory, where danger is gone. It was the quiet of distance, where danger remains, but no longer dictates every breath. The galaxy learned to live inside that space, uneasy but functional. For the first time in ages, events were no longer shaped by anticipation of the Emperor's next move. Wars still occurred, but they burned smaller. Fear still existed, but it no longer organized itself around a single center. Darkness spread unevenly, without coordination. Darth Vitiate did not vanish. His presence lingered like a receding echo, still vast, still ancient, but no longer absolute. Where once his will bent probability itself, now it felt like influence rather than law. The difference was difficult to articulate, but impossible to ignore. Jedi described it as weightlifting from the Force, not fully, but enough to allow movement. Meditation no longer felt like standing beneath a collapsing sky. Futures, once clouded by inevitability, became uncertain again. Not hopeful, just open. The Sith felt the silence differently. They had relied on the Emperor's shadow to stabilize ambition. Without constant pressure, rivalries sharpened. Power struggles returned. The absence of his guiding inevitability forced choice, and choice brought risk. Some Sith thrived in this uncertainty. Others faltered, exposed without an unseen will to contain them. Silence revealed fragility. The galaxy had been unified by fear of one thing. Without that fear dominating every decision, fractures became visible. Old conflicts resurfaced. New ones formed. Yet even this chaos felt different. It belonged to the galaxy again, not to him. The Emperor observed all of this. Observation had always been his strength. Now it was all that remained. He did not intervene as he once had. Not because he could not, but because intervention no longer produced the same return. Influence met resistance. Pressure met diffusion. The silence after the shadow was not emptiness. It was space reclaimed. Vitiate understood what this meant. He was still eternal, still aware, still capable of action. But the galaxy no longer existed solely as extension of his hunger. It had slipped partially beyond his grasp, not through force, but through time and endurance. This silence was not his choosing, and that was the difference. For the first time since Nathema, the galaxy moved without waiting for him. Events unfolded that did not trace back to his will. Decisions were made without fear of his response. The universe had not defeated him, but it had stopped revolving around him. That loss of centrality was profound. The Emperor had defined himself as the axis of existence. Hunger had given him purpose. Control had given him meaning. Now meaning thinned, replaced by duration alone. He remained, but relevance faded. The silence stretched on, not dramatic, not final, but persistent. It forced adaptation not only on the galaxy, but on the Emperor himself. He could continue to exist indefinitely within it, but existence without dominance was a different kind of eternity. This was the silence after the shadow. Not light, not peace, but distance. And distance, once created, cannot be undone easily. The galaxy learned to breathe again, quietly, cautiously, without ceremony. The shadow did not disappear. It simply stopped defining everything. What remained was not victory. It was aftermath. When Darth Vitiate ceased to define the galaxy, nothing replaced him. There was no new balance imposed, no guiding presence to take his place. The universe did not correct itself. It simply continued, carrying the scars of centuries shaped by a hunger that had once been absolute. The Sith Empire did not collapse overnight. It fractured. Without an emperor whose will felt inevitable, authority lost its anchor. Power dispersed into competing hands, each claiming legacy without understanding its cost. Some Sith sought to recreate his methods, and believing dominance alone had sustained him. Others rejected his shadow entirely, turning inward, attempting reform through fear or doctrine. None succeeded in restoring what had been lost. The Jedi did not celebrate either. They understood too well what had happened. The Emperor had not been destroyed in a single moment. He had been outlasted. That knowledge brought no comfort. If such a being could exist once, then existence itself allowed it. The Jedi rebuilt cautiously, aware that vigilance, not triumph, defined survival. Worlds that had suffered under his long shadow rebuilt unevenly. Some thrived quietly, grateful simply to exist without constant dread. Others collapsed under unresolved trauma, their cultures shaped so deeply by fear that they no longer knew how to function without it. So generations had grown beneath an invisible pressure. Its absence left confusion as often as relief. History struggled to name him. Records conflicted, legends blurred. Some described him as a god, others as a tyrant. Many reduced him to myth because accepting the truth felt too heavy. A being who fed on existence itself did not fit neatly into memory, yet traces remained everywhere, in dead worlds that never healed, in force scars that never faded, in instincts that told people to hesitate even when no threat appeared. The galaxy carried his imprint the way stone carries the memory of pressure long after weight is removed. As for Vitiate himself, what remained was endurance without purpose. He did not vanish into death. He did not transcend into something greater. He persisted, diminished not in power, but in relevance. Eternity stretched ahead of him, without hunger to guide it, without dominance to justify it. Existence became observation. This was not punishment. It was consequence. He had built himself to consume forever, but when consumption failed, only time remained. Endless, directionless time. The galaxy no longer fed him. It no longer shaped itself around him. It moved on, imperfect and scarred, but free of his gravity. That freedom was incomplete and fragile, but it was real. What remained when he was gone was not peace, but possibility. The chance for futures not pre-written by one will. The chance for failure without predation. The chance for fear that did not funnel toward a single source. The galaxy would never fully heal. Too much had been taken. Too many lives had ended without meaning. But healing was not the point. Survival was. And survival, quiet and uncelebrated, proved enough. In the end, Darth Vitiate became what he had always feared to be in his earliest, forgotten moments. Not weak, not defeated. Alone. Alone with memory. Alone with eternity. Alone without a galaxy that needed him. His hunger had shaped history, but its end shaped something more enduring. A silence that remained.